Before we jump in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. It seriously helps the channel grow. All right, let's get started.
During an expedition into mysterious ancient ruins, Luffy suddenly vanishes, leaving the Straw Hats frantic and desperate to find him. Instead of answers, they're pulled into something far more unsettling: Luffy's own memories. Trapped in the past with no clear way out, the crew is forced to relive moments from Luffy's childhood, moments he never shared and never planned for them to see. As they witness his early life, his bond with Ace, and the pain and loneliness hidden behind his usual grin, the Straw Hats come face to face with the emotional scars that shaped their captain. The journey becomes less about rescue and more about understanding, as each memory challenges how they see Luffy and their role in his life. Blending friendship, hurt, comfort, and deep emotional introspection, this long, heartfelt fic explores brotherhood, trauma, and unconditional loyalty, showing that some memories are buried not because they're forgotten, but because they hurt too much to share. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Daughter of the Sea by Kuchiachi.
Chapter 12. Enter the Pirate Hunter, Roronoa Zoro. So he finally set out to sea, Nami sighed, a fond look in her eyes. Now the journey officially begins. Brook called out excitedly, his arms up in the air as he danced around. Yo-ho-ho-ho, such a wonderful thing to see. Look how far our captain has come since then. Truly inspiring, don't you all think? Yo-ho-ho-ho. Well, I'll say this much, Sanji smirked, thinking back to that little kid who used to punch himself in the face when he fought. He's not that brat who couldn't even throw a straight punch. And that was how he became the monster we all know and love, Usopp said, grinning, feeling more at ease than he had been for a long time. But as he waited for the darkness to fade, he couldn't help but let his mind wander to some of the memories he had seen before. You know, he said quietly, I still don't get how it was possible that we could see some of those things. I mean, in some of those parts, Luffy was out cold, right? So why were we able to see what was happening? Like when he was attacked by that bear. We shouldn't have seen some of that, right? So what was going on? I've been thinking a lot about that too, and it's hard to say for sure, Robin said, folding her arms as she decided to share her theory with them. It's almost as if we're seeing bits and pieces of Ace's memories as well. But I don't know how that could be possible. There are so many things happening here that I don't understand. From Ace's memory, Nami repeated, startled. Just like Usopp said, some of those memories we shouldn't have seen as clearly as we did. Such as when Luffy was attacked, or how we were hearing about Garp and Dayton speaking about Dragon. Luffy shouldn't have been able to see or hear any of that, we shouldn't have been able to see that, she explained softly. It's almost like a part of Ace's memory is intertwined with Luffy's, though I don't know how else I can explain it. But how is that possible? Sanji asked her. Ace is, he trailed off, unable to finish that line. I don't know any more than you do at this moment, Robin sighed helplessly. But that is the only thing that really makes sense to me. It's only a little bit, but there are parts of Ace's memories mixed in here as well. What about Sabo? Chopper asked her in confusion. I mean, we didn't see any of his memories, at least I don't think so. But Robin just shrugged, wishing that she had a better answer for them all. I'm just glad that we don't have to deal with watching those snot-nosed nobles again, Frankie said, folding his arms as well. He thought about them with a surge of anger. I really can't wait to meet them when we go visit Goa. Even if they deserve it, we aren't going to hurt them, are we? Chopper asked worriedly, not liking the idea of being a bad guy. Of course we won't go that far, Zoro said coolly. I never intended to go there and attack them like some low-life bandit. I merely meant simply going to stroll through town and make them sweat. If we attack them, we'll be no better than them, won't we? I just want them to see that they're not as powerful as they think they are. I'll only attack if they're dumb enough to attack me. But as Chopper looked away, looking relieved, Zoro added in an undertone, God, I hope they attack me. Suddenly the darkness disappeared again and they were in a bright sunny day out on the bright, clear blue ocean. The familiar sea stretched on forever on all sides, sparkling from the hot sun from above, but there was also a gentle breeze that blew over with clouds drifting lazily across the sky. It's gorgeous, Nami whispered, smiling brightly, breathing in the salty air, only wishing that she could really feel the sea air on her face. It's so good to be back on the sea. Yeah, but I still don't like this, Usopp said, still standing on the water as he watched the waves lapped up over his boots but passed right through without getting wet. It's not natural. Nothing about this crazy place is natural, Zoro said, wondering just what was happening now. But before he could get his bearings straight, Chopper suddenly screamed out and jumped up onto his shoulder fearfully, pointing out to their far left. Chopper, what is it? He asked in annoyance, forcing him to let go of his neck as he glared out to see what was going on. Oh, he said in mild surprise. What? Usopp asked, but then his mouth fell open in horror. There was a giant whirlpool right in front of them, large enough to sink a sailboat. It stretched out in all directions in a perfect circle, spiraling down to, most likely, the bottom of the ocean. The center was pitch black and the sound coming from inside it would have been deafening if you were near it. Where'd that thing come from? Brook called in surprise. I don't know, but judging from the calm weather, this should still be the East Blue, Nami said gazing up at the cloud formations, but it's still unbelievable to see such a big whirlpool out here. How can you tell, Nami-san? Brook asked her, looking up as well, but unable to see what she was seeing. The weather patterns and wind are much more stable, Nami answered, still examining the clouds. It's not as random as the Grand Line weather. But why are we seeing this? Sanji asked, when just that moment, they could see a large and luxurious ship sailing by the whirlpool. Is that a pirate ship? Chopper asked curiously, shielding his eyes from the sun so that he could get a good look at the flag. No, it's just a passenger ship, Robin answered, and considering the history of the East Blue, there are a lot of cruises and traveling done here. Hey, Nami said worriedly, watching the ship sailing closer. If they get any nearer they could get into trouble. It's big, but is the whirlpool really big enough to suck them in? Usopp asked in surprise. Maybe not sink it, but they could still do a lot of damage, Frankie said, lifting his sunglasses to get a look at the ship. But as Zoro kept his eye on the ship, he noticed something popping up from the ocean a little ways from the ocean's vortex. He said as he looked over to see a large barrel bobbing in the water and drifting along the current towards the ship. He blinked once before his eye widened and he looked from the whirlpool to the barrel. Oh, no, he moaned out, don't tell me. What's wrong now? Brook asked. What's wrong is that the barrel there looks familiar, Zoro told him, pointing it out. Where did we see a barrel that big before? What you mean the one that Luffy took with him? And she stopped talking as it slowly dawned on her what he was saying. You don't think? Usopp asked, eyes wide. Did that idiot get sucked into that whirlpool? Nami cried out angrily, looking around and suddenly seeing the few broken shards of wood that must have come from a tiny boat. Is he nuts? How could he sail straight into a whirlpool? Well, since he couldn't swim, I think that was his best option. Robin smiled as she watched the container go bobbing over to the ship where a few deckhands heard it bump against the side and looked down. That's hardly the issue here. Nami yelled at her as the men pulled out a rope and hook so that they could try heaving it up, thinking it was full of booze or food. You really think that Luffy's in there? Usopp asked with Chopper glancing at it with curiosity as it was slowly hauled to the deck. I'd bet my best cooking knife on that, Sanji sighed. Idiot just left home and he already almost got himself killed. How could he have survived without us there? Usopp asked exasperatedly. But just as the men were about to open the barrel, the crewmate in the crow's nest suddenly screamed out something about pirates. Looking up and over the deck, their jaws suddenly fell open in horror at what was coming towards them. Sneaking out from the cover of a nearby island was a large pink ship, with 4 sails, each with pink heart, and the ship itself has 2 hearts on each side. The figurehead looked like a duck, or swan, it was hard to tell, while its flag was of a sideways skull with a heart. Oh, that poor ship. Frankie called out, falling to his knees in horror. What the hell did they do to it? It looks like something a little girl would use, Sanji said, sweating, but a pirate. Bet you anything that the captain's a girl, Zoro said, feeling sick at the thought of sailing under a flag like that. It's almost too cute, Robin said blankly. The men were freaking out and dropped the barrel at once just as the cannons were sounded off in the distance. Oh, come on, what's the point of seeing all that? Usopp cried out as the memory quickly faded away. I think it's fascinating, Robin said lightly. I see what happened. Luffy set sail, and sometime during the journey he must have been pulled into the whirlpool and saved himself by climbing into the barrel. He just happened to end up here. What rotten timing, Brook said thinking it over. He's pulled onto a ship just as a pirate raid is about to happen. He's always had bad luck when it comes to stuff like this, Zoro sighed. That's for sure, Nami agreed tiredly, thinking painfully of all the trouble that boy put them through because of his rotten luck, but then again, when it counts, he does have amazingly good luck too. It really all depends on the situation, I guess. But why doesn't he come out of that barrel? Chopper asked her, but before Nami could answer they were suddenly in the lower parts of the ship. They could hear the sounds of fighting above deck and Luffy's barrel was now lying among some destroyed tables and china showing that it somehow must have rolled down here and smashed. Hello, squeaked a voice from nowhere. At first, the Straw Hats didn't see anyone until they noticed a boy's face cautiously sticking his head into the room.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
He was a chubby boy with pink hair and round glasses. His face was timid and he was glancing around fearfully as if he expected someone to jump out and attack him. Recognizing him at once, Zoro's one eye widened in surprise. Kobe, he said. Kobe, Brook repeated in confusion. Wait, you mean that's Kobe? Nami said startled, that's the same friend of Luffy's that we met back at Water 7. Ah, a friend of Luffy Sans, Brook said in understanding, looking at Kobe with new interest. Yeah, a marine friend of his, Chopper explained. He's a marine. Brook cried in shock, what a surprise this is. Believe me, you aren't the only one who thinks that, Nami sighed. Kobe sure looks different though, Chopper said, looking at him, he was a lot taller when we saw him. He did a lot of growing up in a short time, Zoro nodded, apparently Garp took him under his wing and had been training him since we last saw him. Garp. Oh, that explains a lot, Frankie said, thinking of Luffy's insane grandpa. Kobe continued to look around. I sure hope no one's in here, he said to himself as he walked in. I don't see anyone, do you? Sanji asked as if talking to someone slow. Kobe sighed in relief, his hand over his heart, glad to see that he was alone. That's a relief, he said before he spotted the barrel. Wow, he said, still talking to himself as he went over to look at it, that's one big barrel, I wonder what's inside it. Won't he get a shock to find out that there's a pirate inside it? Usopp smirked, hoping that they would get to see it as Kobe began to push it out of the room and through to the next room. But as he struggled with it, a voice suddenly growled out, it's our favorite coward. Glancing up, there were 3 pirates poking their heads through the next door. Trying to hide in here and duck out on all the action again. One of them snarled at Kobe, who jumped back, waving his hands in the air, trying to explain that he was only trying to bring them that barrel of booze over to them. Wait a minute, if he's a marine, why would he be on a pirate crew? Brook asked in confusion. Because he was being held prisoner, Zoro explained, thinking back to what Kobe told him when they first met. He was stuck as a cabin boy for a pirate captain named Alvida. Why? Usopp asked baffled, he doesn't look like much of a fighter. Neither do you, but you have your uses, Sanji pointed out as Usopp glared at him. Hey, he yelled outraged. I think Kobe was pretty decent at navigation and that's why they kept him, Zoro said with a shrug as the pirates laughed at Kobe and attempted to lighten the load. You can't, Kobe cried out in fear, Lady Alvida will kill us if she ever finds out. She won't if you keep your trap shut, one sneered at him, right, Kobe? Yeah, right, Kobe squealed, looking ready to agree with just about anything they said to keep them happy. We sure that's the same kid we met? Sanji asked uncertainly, as the fat pirate heaved the barrel upright. He's a chicken with no guts. Hold on boys, the pirate said again, cracking his knuckles, I'll open her the old-fashioned way. Wait, you mean break a barrel of liquor? Usopp repeated, jaw falling open, what sense does that make? Well, not all pirates are geniuses, you know, Zoro said, sweat dropped, even if there was booze in there, it would be such a waste, tragic. The pirate held his fist high, but he held it there dramatically for a second too long. Something came burst through the wood, smashing the lid to pieces and the familiar face of Monkey D. Luffy suddenly there. His face was one who had a good night's sleep and he was stretching out widely as he suddenly cried out, I slept so good. Without even realizing what he did, Luffy accidentally knocked out the same pirate who had been attempting to break open the barrel and he was out before he even hit the ground. Sounds like it was a good nap, Frankie roared with laughter as Kobe and the other 2 men screamed out in terror. Now that's something I didn't see coming. Luffy finished yawning and stretching out, looking at the scene in confusion. The pirate he knocked out was now moaning slightly on the floor as he glanced down at him. Who's that? The pirate you knocked out? Brook offered helpfully with a laugh. The other 2 pirates were staring at him with open mouths, too stunned to move. Who the hell are you? Luffy asked as if they had bothered him. Who the hell are you? They screamed back at them. Your friend will catch a cold sleeping like that, Luffy added casually as he stepped out of his barrel. You're the one who knocked him out. The pirates yelled hysterically. You think they've never seen a man fall asleep in a barrel before, Frankie said, grinning. One of the pirates pointed a sword at Luffy's face as he demanded, hold up. Are you messing with us? Don't you know that we're vicious pirates? Naturally, Luffy ignored what they were saying as he turned to Kobe, who was staring at him in panic, like he thought that Luffy was going to eat him. I'm starving. Got any food? He asked him. Of course that would be the first thing he thinks of, Sanji sighed, shaking his head. Honestly, doesn't he ever think about anything but food? Fighting, Usopp offered helpfully. Adventures, Chopper added. He's got a one-track mind that he can't help, Nami sighed, but she was fighting a smile. I guess we just have to live with it. I'm talking to you, the pirate yelled, furious that Luffy wasn't even looking at them. You damn kid, the second shouted as they attempted to attack him with their swords. However, their fight was over so fast that most of them didn't see what had happened. The only thing they were aware of was that the swords were snapped in 2, and the halves were now embedded in the ceiling while the 2 were brought to their knees shaking in terror as they stared at Luffy. Wow, he can break swords now? Chopper asked in amazement. Those were some cheap swords, Zoro grunted, really why would anyone want to use just a couple dull blades like that? Those things were barely sharp. Pathetic. What is wrong with you two? Luffy asked them, both annoyed. Really, Frankie agreed. If they're crying over this, I'm almost afraid to see how their captain is. WH, who are you? One croaked out, his eyes wide and sweat pouring down his face. My name's Monkey D. Luffy said happily as he crossed his arms and grinned. Hi, nice way to meet someone, Usopp laughed as the two went screaming from the room, dragging out their unconscious friend behind them. Knock them out, break their weapons and introduce themselves after all that. Typical of you, Luffy. They looked like they were about to shit themselves, Sanji laughed loudly. Kobe, who was cowering on his knees behind Luffy was now gawking up at him, as he peeked through his trembling fingers. So what just happened? Kobe stuttered, not understanding what. Ya got me, Luffy said, unconcerned, probably thinking that those men had issues. Kobe blinked before he suddenly started to freak out and yelled, quick, you gotta run. If those guys come back with their buddies then they'll kill you on the spot. Didn't he see him deal with those guys there? Brook asked, tilting his head. He shouldn't worry. Those guys were nothing but a bunch of bullies and cowards anyway, Sanji said in a bored way. They go after other weaklings, but when they finally meet someone stronger than them, off they go, crying all the way. That's usually what happens, Usopp sighed in disappointment. These guys have no idea to what it means to be a real pirate. Isn't that what you used to do? Nami asked him, eyebrows raised. Hey, I changed a lot since then I'll have you know. He told hotly. I don't care about that, I'm hungry, Luffy said still grinning, even as he was sniffing the air, much like how a dog would when he smelled food. How can you just blow this off like that? Kobe continued to panic, now screaming, there are hundreds of them up on deck and they're waiting for an excuse to kill anything. Luffy ignored him as he headed towards the nearest door, Kobe now attempting to hold him back as he grabbed hold of one of his arms. But Luffy kept going forward, not paying any attention as he went sniffing out for the source of the food. Nothing was going to stop him, even when Kobe's head was slammed in the door. I think it goes without saying, nothing stands between Luffy and food. Robin smiled as they continued to follow him as he found his way to the storage room that was filled with crates of foodstuff. Drooling in happiness, Luffy jumped down, looking around to try and figure out what he should eat first. That's as good as treasure to him, Sanji laughed as Luffy finally made up his mind and dove his face into a giant crate of apples. He was so focused on eating, that they were pretty sure that he couldn't hear any of the questions that Kobe was asking him. So you said that he's only being held as a prisoner, he's not actually a pirate? Chopper asked them all as he looked at Kobe. That's what I heard, Zoro told him, so this is when Luffy met Kobe, but why is this all important? So are we on a pirate ship or what? Luffy asked suddenly with a mouthful of apple. Why didn't he sit through Makino-san's lessons? Sanji hissed to himself, disgusted at his manners. No, we're on a passenger ship that's being raided by pirates, Kobe explained quickly, pirates under the command of Lady Alvida. Who? Chopper asked in confusion. Never heard of her either, Frankie said with a yawn. Just some run-of-the-mill pirate, Nami said, thinking back. I remember stealing from her once. You did? Robin asked in mild surprise. Yeah, Nami nodded, rubbing the back of her head with a satisfied smile. It was when she was attacking a passenger ship just like this one once. I dressed up as a pirate and sunk on board. I left before the fighting was over with all her treasure, I have to say that it was a decent haul. Of all places to be stuck on, Usopp sighed. Just what kind of star was he born under? I think we all like to know that, Zoro agreed darkly, folding his arms. Who cares? Luffy asked, not at all concerned. What I want to know is if there are any boats on board. What's the point of getting one when you'll just end up sinking it? Nami hollered at him, once again, wishing that she could give Luffy a piece of her mind. I think there are a few, Kobe said after thinking it over. Great, cause mine got sucked into some big whirlpool, Luffy explained. I knew it, Zoro muttered, shaking his head. That idiot, Nami cried out, smacking her forehead. You don't normally steer your ship into a whirlpool. That big one outside, Kobe cried out in amazement, no way. No one could have survived that. Yeah, I gotta say it was a big surprise. Luffy laughed loudly, finally turning to look at Kobe. He doesn't seem that fazed by it, considering he can't swim. Usopp called loudly. Would have been embarrassing if he drowned just when he left home, Zoro yawned. As Kobe continued to stare at Luffy, just as he asked, so are you one of the pirates or one of the passengers? Kobe suddenly flinched and looked down in shame as he explained that he had been Alvida's prisoner after he accidentally mistaken a fishing boat and a pirate boat together. So in order to live, he had been forced to work as a cabin boy for the last 2 years. He said that the only reason he was still alive was because he did whatever they told him. It must have been very hard for you, Kobe-san, Brook said softly, forced to serve a pirate crew for 2 years. Nami's eyes softened at that. She understood the feeling of being forced to work for such cruel pirates, but here Kobe must have had plenty of chances to escape surely. So what was he waiting for? You mean he got on the wrong boat and now he's stuck here forever? Usopp repeated incredulously. How can anyone be that dumb? Zoro asked. If memory serves me correctly, didn't you get on the wrong ship back at Sabayati, Moss Head? Sanji reminded him with an amused grin. You thought that this great big galleon was the fishing boat. Shut up. Zoro shouted at him, his face slightly red. It was that old man's fault. His instructions were too complicated. Complicated, Nami repeated, staring at him, amazed by his levels of stupidity. How could you possibly get something like that mixed up? You weren't there, so what do you know? He barked back at her. Geez, you're pretty stupid, you know that, right? Luffy asked Koby bluntly once he had heard everything and finished stuffing his mouth. The harsh honesty of his words made them all forget about the argument and turn to watch. Geez, thanks for your honesty, Koby muttered as he lowered his head pitifully. If you hate it here, then leave, Luffy suggested. For once I agree with him, Nami said, frowning. It's not like there's anything Alvida's holding over his head. He could have left a long time ago. Are you kidding? Koby cried out, shaking his head violently from side to side. No way.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Nah, not a chance. Just the thought of Alvida finding me scares me so bad I wanna throw up. What a baby, Frankie sighed. By the time she notices he's gone, he'll be far away by then. So on top of being an idiot, he's stuck here for life. Zoro said lightly. Harsh way to put it, but I have to agree, Usopp said darkly as Nami shook her own head. Come on, even he would have been desperate enough to escape as soon as he got the chance. So you're a moron and a coward. Luffy laughed. I hate people like you. At his words, Koby started crying out, just proving what they all knew. But Robin blinked in surprise before a small smile appeared on her face again as her eyes shone with amusement. Sanji glanced at her and asked, what is it, Robin-san? He asked her. Just feeling a sense of déjà vu, she answered honestly. Déjà vu, Chopper repeated in confusion. It means the strong sensation that something like this has happened before, she answered. I just noticed how similar that Luffy was treating Koby here. It was the same way to how Ace treated Luffy during their childhood, harsh and blunt. Huh, you know, now that you mention it, Luffy does seem to act a lot like Ace sometimes, Chopper said, thinking it over. After spending so much time together, it's only natural, Sanji said lightly as Koby kept crying. After a few minutes Koby regained control and rubbed his swollen eyes as he muttered, hey, you're right Luffy, if I had the courage, I could drift alone in a barrel and be rid of this place. I actually have my own dreams. Someday, I'd like to live out all of them. But he won't be able to do anything if he doesn't leave, Chopper said. He learned that years ago, just sitting around and waiting wasn't going to cause your dreams to come true. You have to be willing to go out into the world and risk your life for them. That was what Luffy taught him when they met. Sure, it had been a dangerous and long road since he left home, but he didn't regret it. He was happier here with his friends than he was back on Drum. There were plenty of nights that he felt homesick and wanted to go back to see it again, but when he woke up to a new day, he couldn't imagine anywhere he'd rather be. When the world shoves you around, you gotta stand up and shove back, Zoro said, folding his arms darkly. It's not like somebody's gonna save you if you start babbling excuses. Very well said, Zoro-san, Brook said softly, but also remembering how when the Straw Hats appeared out of nowhere and saved him. But a little help now and again doesn't hurt. Koby stayed quiet for a few more seconds before he finally looked up at Luffy and asked timidly, so what about you, Luffy? What was it that got you to first set sail on these seas? Well, I'm gonna be king of the pirates, Luffy said with a wide smile, as if he couldn't be happier that Koby had asked him that. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, Koby's mouth fell open in horror and his face was contorted in absolute panic, like he was close to having another freak-out episode. Maybe that wasn't the best thing to say to someone, Nami offered evenly. Koby's mouth was moving, but he didn't seem to know how to speak. Finally, he croaked out, the king. Luffy nodded. Yep, he said simply. Are you serious? Koby asked in disbelief. Yeah, Luffy said cheerfully. But, Koby hissed, but that would mean you're a pirate too. If you want to be the pirate king, that would help, Robin smiled. Right, Luffy confirmed proudly. Your crew? Koby continued to ask, shaking, as if terrified to learn the answer. Don't have one yet, but I'm looking for them, Luffy told him firmly. But at those words, Koby froze, as if he had become a statue. Is he okay? Usopp asked slowly, watching Luffy's smile fade and waving his hand in front of Koby's face. Well, he didn't expect such a happy and cheerful person to be a pirate, Robin offered. Luffy's nothing like the standard pirate that you normally think of. So I guess he was just taken aback, especially since he came out and opened up to him. He wouldn't be the first one to do that, Nami smiled, having the same feelings of surprise when she first met Luffy. He's not like any other person I've ever met. Koby stood up suddenly, found his voice, and he began yelling, King of the Pirates is a title given to one who has attended everything the world has to offer. You're talking about seeking out the great treasure of wealth, fame, and power. The treasure that you seek is the One Piece. Yeah, Luffy said brightly. Yeah, that's it, Koby demanded, sounding close to hysteria. Pirates from all over the world are looking for that treasure, you know. Oh, he knows, he just doesn't care, Usopp said, grinning. Yeah, so? Luffy asked predictably. No way. It's impossible, impossible, impossible. There's no way someone like you could ever reach the top in the Great Pirate Age. Kobe yelled frantically as he shook his head rapidly. What's he mean by that? Chopper asked. He doesn't think Luffy can do it. But no one could answer him as Kobe kept screaming out, getting louder with every second. There are just too many out there who are meaner and better but before he could finish saying what was on his mind, Luffy finally gave him a sharp punch to the top of his head, so that he did a faceplant on the floor. Thank you for shutting him up, Sanji said, flipping his hair back. He was starting to drive me crazy. Any longer and he would have burst a blood vessel, Robin stated coolly as Kobe moaned on the floor with his hands over his head. Ow, he whined, why did you hit me? I thought it was obvious, Brook said cheerfully. My ears were starting to hurt from all the shouting. Not that I have any ears to hear with. Yo ho ho, Brook, just do you hear? Usopp asked curiously, wanting to have asked him that for a long time. The same way that I see, Usopp-san, Brook answered as if it was obvious. Usopp blinked. What? He asked, but Luffy had interrupted by answering Kobe. Cause I felt like it, he said. He rarely ever thinks about anything, he goes by instinct, Nami sighed. Kobe slowly sat up, his hand still on the spot where Luffy hit him. Oh well, I'm used to that stuff. My crewmates smack me around a lot. All the time in fact. With crewmates like that, who needs friends? Frankie asked in disgust. Luffy gently put his hand on his hat as he explained, it's not about if I can. I'm doing it cause I want to do it. Kobe looked up at him as Luffy took the straw hat off and stared at it. The straw hats all knew at once what must have been going through his head as he stared at it. He was thinking of Shanks. I decided long ago that I was going to be king of the pirates, he said without any doubt or fear in his voice, if I have to die fighting for that, then I die. Zoro smirked. I think we all feel that way, he said as they all nodded. They all willingly chose to run off and chase their dreams and were willing to die for what they wanted. They were going to go to the end together. Kobe didn't say a word, he only continued to stare long and hard at him as seeing something that he never seen before. Zoro smirked again, he had seen that many times. Luffy's apparent selflessness often inspires others to chase their dreams as well. He knew better than anyone what that felt like, to be willing to risk your life for what you believe in, what you wanted. Here, probably for the first time, Kobe was thinking about what he wanted, and wondering if he was willing to fight for it. There was just something about Luffy that did that. Right now, Luffy stood for everything that Kobe was against, but already he could tell that Kobe was beginning to see Luffy as a friend. After putting the hat back on, Luffy turned to leave, ready to go look for a boat to borrow. I guess I never thought of it like that, Kobe said to himself as he thought over everything Luffy said. If I put my mind to it, if I'm prepared to die for it, could I do something like that? Anyone can if you put your mind to it. Usopp said grinning, and if they laugh or say it's impossible, just keep going and prove them wrong. Well said, Frankie said joyfully and clapped a metal hand on his shoulder. Luffy must have heard him, even though it was hardly more than a whisper. Like what? He asked curiously. Do you think? Kobe asked hesitantly, as if afraid that Luffy would laugh if he said what was on his mind, do you think I could ever join the Marines? Marines? Luffy repeated in surprise. Yes, Kobe yelled, standing up, tears in his eyes as he proclaimed his deepest wish of becoming a Marine and hunt down criminals. Do you think I can do it? Kobe asked Luffy. Criminal, Robin said softly, suddenly thinking that down. Just what made a criminal, she wondered. Did becoming a criminal make you bad? She learned the hard way a long time ago that the views of what's right and wrong change more often than the phases of the moon. Just what made something bad, she wondered. How would I know that? Luffy answered honestly with a short laugh, interrupting her thoughts, almost thinking that Luffy had heard her. Then I'm gonna do it. Kobe exclaimed as he pumped his arms up, his confidence going up by leaps and bounds as he followed after him. I'm not gonna get stuck here as a cabin boy for the rest of my life. You tell him, Frankie cheered on. You go and do what you want. I'll break out and then turn right around and catch Alvida myself. Kobe proclaimed loudly, quickly following Luffy, but almost as soon as he said that, the ceiling above them suddenly exploded. What the hell? Sanji yelled, quickly moving out of the way instinctively, though there wasn't any reason. Just then, the form of what looked like, at first, was a giant blob crashing from the upper decks and landed with a bang in front of them. Kobe was screaming and moved back, all the confidence he once had vanishing on the spot. What's going on? Chopper screamed out, ducking behind Frankie, now wishing he knew what was going on. Who is that you're planning on catching, Kobe? Demanded a harsh voice, definitely female however. And you actually think this twig is gonna help you? Kobe only shrank back to the corner, shaking in terror, covering his face with his hands as if hoping that would hide him. Well, the voice demanded and the smoke cleared enough for them to see who it was and several of them gasped. Answer me. Chopper's mouth dropped in surprise. Wow, she's huge. Who is that? Brook gasped, hoping that he would never see her panties. That, my friends, Nami explained, her hands on her hips, is Alvida. Captain of the Alvida Pirates. Creative name, Zoro said sarcastically, rolling his eyes as most of the rest just gaped at her. She was a very obese woman with long wavy black hair, and freckles on her cheeks. But she looked more like a round dumpling. They'd never seen a woman as big as her before. "Who are you going to catch?" Alvida demanded again harshly, holding up an enormous mace over her shoulders. "Come on, Kobe," Chopper screamed out, getting over his shock, and now trying to encourage Kobe to stand up and fight back. "You can do it." Suddenly, several swords came through the back wall, just missing Luffy's head on either side of him. Glancing at them in mild surprise, Alvida glared at Kobe before she turned her attention back up at Luffy, looking him up and down. She suddenly smirked. "Well, my guess is that you're not Zoro the pirate hunter." Zoro's one eye blinked in surprise as Luffy looked confused as he repeated, "Zoro." But Alvida didn't go on as she glared back down at Kobe. "Kobe," she barked and he jumped in terror, "who's the most beautiful of all on these seas?" "Sure as hell isn't you," Frankie answered, which made Brook laugh loudly. "Has she ever seen her reflection?" Usopp said, looking ready to collapse at such a question. "She can't honestly mean herself, can she?" "Yeah, the answer is me obviously," Nami said, shaking her head, and this time, Usopp really did fall over at Nami's lack of modesty. "There is no doubt in my mind, Nami my love," Sanji suddenly cried out, turning his attention back to her, now gazing at her as if she were the setting sun. "What an idiot," Zoro muttered in disgust. "What was that, Moss Head?" Sanji barked. While at the same time, Kobe tried to answer her, but stuttered the whole time, unable to form any audible words. "Hey Kobe, who's the fat lady?" Luffy asked bluntly as he pointed at Alvida. There was stunned silence for a fraction of a moment. Kobe and Alvida were both gaping at him, as the pirates who were sticking their heads down through the hole were staring at him in shock. But the Straw Hats were all roaring with laughter. Brook had fallen to his knees and was beating the floor with a bony fist as Robin giggled to herself, and everyone had tears of laughter in their eyes. Only Sanji remained silent, but only because he believed that every woman deserved respect. He just stood there, watching them, shaking his head at Luffy's rudeness. "Oh no," one of the pirates above them croaked out, knowing that their captain wasn't going to take this sitting down. Alvida looked like she was really going to burst blood vessels as she glared at Luffy, her face contorted with fury. "You runts," she roared as she brought her mace swinging down at him, who easily jumped up and landed light as a feather next to Kobe once Alvida smashed the floor where he had been standing a moment before, the attack sending the shrapnel everywhere. "Let's go," Luffy said excitedly as he grabbed Kobe's arm, and together, they went flying through the hole, Kobe clinging to Luffy in terror. "This is a riot," Frankie laughed as he jumped up, and they all followed after them. "I can't remember enjoying a show more." They jumped up in time to arrive on a large deck with Luffy already fighting the entire crew, who was jumping around and smacking them all like they were rag dolls. It wasn't even a fight, the monsters back in Goa were a bigger threat than these weaklings. But, without a doubt, the best part was where Luffy finally decided to show off his powers. And with one Gum Gum rocket, ended up clobbering them all as they tried to run in terror. "Just shows how hard work and determination can pay off," Sanji answered, remembering all the times that he worked with cooking and fighting. His ribs still hurt at the memories of all the kicks he got from the old geezer while he was growing up. Kobe staggered to his feet and took a few shaky steps towards Luffy, staring at him with his jaw wide open. "Luffy, what are you?" "You would think they've never seen a rubberman before," Brook said happily. "Oh," Luffy said, as if just remembering. He grabbed hold of his cheek and stretched it out, explaining, "I'm a rubberman." "So you're made of rubber?" Kobe repeated in disbelief. He was completely unaware that Alvida was now standing behind him. "That's normally what a rubberman is made of," Nami said evenly as Alvida cleared her throat from behind Kobe, who squealed and went to hide behind Luffy as she gazed at Luffy with new interest. "So, you've eaten one of the devil fruits, right?" Alvida asked, although she already had her answer. "Yeah, I ate the Gum Gum fruit," Luffy confirmed, letting his cheek snap back into place. "I've heard rumors about it, but I haven't seen any proof of them before today," Alvida said idly, and then she asked if he was a bounty hunter. "I'm a pirate," Luffy corrected. "Pirate?" Alvida scoffed, rolling her eyes. "All by yourself on these waters?" "Well, we all have to start somewhere," Usopp laughed. But Robin's attention was distracted for a moment when she saw someone behind them on Alvida's ship sneaking over the side with a giant load on her back. She blinked, startled. She could have sworn she recognized that orange hair. Was that? But Luffy was talking again. "Today it's just me. But I'll find my crew tomorrow. Or next week or something. I dunno, like 10 guys." "Yeah, 10, he decided. "Well, he's gotten that," Sanji said. "All of us here, plus once our favorite fishman once he joins." Ace was right, that's just like him to want a small crew, Nami sighed, but still having a good time. She was liking these memories much better than the sad ones they had watched. Alvida only laughed again as she demanded, "Tell me. If we're both pirates and we're not under the same flag, then that makes us enemies, am I right?" "Luffy, let's go," Kobe whispered in fear, trying to get his attention. "But why?" Luffy asked in confusion. "Yeah, why?" Zoro said in annoyance. He saw what he could do. You think he would be more optimistic about him beating her? Feared as that to people, I suppose, Chopper said, wondering just what was going to happen next. You saw how powerful her club is. And of all the villainous cheats in all these waters, she's easily the most. Kobe suddenly stopped himself in mid-sentence. He stared long and hard at Luffy, and they could see that his mind was working hard. Here was his chance, to either turn back on his dream, or to finally start fighting for it, and himself. Go on, tell me. Alvida asked with a wide grin on her face. Kobe was shaking, his teeth were grinding together as he fought to find the right words. Finally, he looked Alvida straight in the eyes and yelled out, "You're the most, ugliest thing on the seas." Yeah, Frankie yelled out, punching the air. That's right, he did it. Chopper cried out happily, jumping up and down. He found his courage. Zoro, Nami, and Usopp were all laughing with Luffy, who seemed to be having a great deal of fun. Alvida's eyes were dark, she was glaring down at Kobe coldly, who was shaking, stunned by his own daring. What did you say? Alvida demanded, and though it was clear that Kobe was terrified, he didn't back down, even with tears burning his eyes. I'm leaving and I'm gonna join the Marines. He yelled up at her, his courage rushing forward like how it did before when he talked to Luffy. Then I'm gonna spend the rest of my life beating up dirty pirates like you. Do you have any clue to what you're saying to me right now? She bellowed at him. Of course I do, and I'm gonna do what I want and no one's gonna stop me. And when I join the Marines I'll join them. Kobe said loudly, before finally screaming out, and I'm gonna capture your lousy ass first. You tell her, Brook said proudly. Standing up for yourself is the same for standing up for your dreams. Alvida lost it completely as she held her mace high, screaming out that he was dead. Kobe froze, and was screaming just as Luffy stopped laughing, but the smile never faded. Well said, Luffy told him, moving to stand in front as he took the full blunt of the weapon. Kobe screamed again as he was hit, but the Straw Hats all grinned, knowing that this was nothing. The spikes were dull, and he was now grinning. That won't work, he taunted so that Alvida's eyes widened in disbelief. Luffy knocked the mace upwards. 'Cause I'm rubber, he told her. The Straw Hats heard that often enough to think fondly of how many times that little fact had gotten Luffy out of trouble. Luffy pulled his arm back, sending it back as far as it would stretch so that it left the ship and was already over the ocean. Gum gum, pistol, he screamed, bringing it back, and like that, Alvida was sent flying off as he punched her to the gut. Luffy, Sanji hollered at him furiously, don't you dare mistreat a lady. But no one took him any heed as everyone in the memory gapped at Luffy, unable to believe that he took out their captain in one hit. But he turned to the rest of the crew on the opposite ship and demanded, hey, you. Go find a boat and give it to Kobe. He's leaving to join the Marines. You're not gonna stop him. Nami smiled quietly. That's so like him. Even though they just met, he's already treating Kobe like a friend, Usopp stated, and he's helping him out here. When he sees someone willing to fight for their dream, then he wants to fight with them as well, Brook said, truly touched by the scene as Kobe thanked Luffy, his voice full of sincerity. Not a moment too soon though, there was the sounds of cannon fire and the ship was tossed violently as they all turned to see that the Marines had finally shown up. Right on time, they arrive after the problem's been dealt with, like always, Sanji sighed. Luffy happily told Kobe that the timing couldn't have been better as he jumped overboard to where the pirates had gotten the boat ready. But Kobe didn't want to stay, not that they blamed him. If the Marines caught him, then they would surely throw him into prison for his work on Alvida's crew. Though technically a pirate himself, the fact that he had still been doing odd jobs for them would have been more than enough to earn him a prison cell. So the two jumped into the boat, and let it fall to the ocean below, deciding to take their chances in escaping. You know, Luffy's still not technically a pirate, so they can't really do anything to him, Usopp pointed out. He's got no crew, he hasn't done anything yet, so they can't. You think that loudmouth would keep that a secret? Sanji demanded irritably. He's proud of it. He can't wait to tell that to anyone who even looks at him that he's a pirate. He stopped dead, his voice caught in his throat as he looked up. The others had followed his gaze, and Nami's eyes widened. As the ship had fallen, water had splashed everywhere, and though it was hard to tell, especially with all the cannons going off, but there was a single passenger in another small boat who was tying an enormous bag that could only be filled with treasure. Nami, Usopp cried out in surprise. That is me, Nami said, remembering now. That's right, I told you all that I robbed from Alvida before. I just didn't think that this was that same day. You don't remember seeing Luffy there? Chopper asked as the Luffy and Nami in the memory both caught each other's attention. They exchanged eye contact for a fraction of a second, but that didn't last long as they both turned back to the matter at hand on escaping. So much was happening, Nami said softly. I didn't really get a good look at his face, but I do remember wondering what kind of idiot would drop down like that with no warning. The truth was that she was used to risking her life and doing dangerous stuff all the time after 8 years of stealing from pirates, so she didn't pay any attention to him. But really, how could she have possibly known that the boy she saw that day would become her future captain? Robin voiced her thought. Fate works in strange ways, she said as they all nodded along with her. The cannons kept falling and there were shouts of panic as the ships rocked and rolled. Luffy and Kobe went back to steering their ship and soon, Nami was lost in the chaos that happened. With their attention focused on rounding up the pirates, the Marines didn't notice the two small boats making a break for it. Thanks to their small size, they were able to slip past them all and soon the turmoil was nothing but distant shouts and booms in the distance. Kobe and Luffy were both sailing through the calm water, with Luffy grinning happily. Kobe was staring around him, as if he couldn't believe where he was. After 2 years of near slavery, he was finally free. "We actually managed to get away," he whispered. Luffy started to chuckle. "What fun." He laughed. "Of course he had a blast," Nami sighed. "Hell, I had fun and I didn't do anything," Frankie said, pressing down on his nose to give himself a shark's fin hairdo. "But boy, I wish I was part of the action." "So Luffy," Kobe asked, suddenly turning his attention back to him. "If you're searching for the elusive One Piece, then that would mean you're heading to the Grand Line. The guys I've talked to all call that place the Pirate Graveyard." "You don't know the half of it, pal," Sanji said. "After all, what you're talking about is only the first half and it's considered paradise." "Right, and that's why I need an extra strong crew," Luffy said firmly, thinking to himself. "Ah, I think I feel my skin blushing, not that I have skin to blush with," Brook said laughing. But Luffy looked back at him and asked, "You guys mentioned some pirate hunter, so what's he like?" Once again, Zoro's one eye widened at that. Did this mean that Luffy purposely set out to meet him? That it wasn't just a chance meeting? But why would he ask about you? Frankie asked, glancing at Zoro. "You were a pirate hunter, not a pirate, that's a big difference." He shrugged, not bothering to say anything, though truthfully he didn't know what to say. "Oh, you mean Zoro?" Kobe asked. "Last I heard he was being held prisoner at some marine base." "Wait, you were held captive?" Chopper cried out, unable to believe that his hero had once been locked up. "Hey, if I wanted to I could have escaped whenever I wanted to." Zoro snapped. This was only half true however. If he wanted to, he could have left without a word before he was tied up, but once he was fixed to that stupid post and left for 3 weeks, he didn't realize just how weak he had become. "Really?" Chopper asked, admiration in his eyes. "But how'd you get caught in the first place?" Usopp asked, "Like how you were caught back at Fishman Island." But before he could think of an answer, Luffy sighed. "Oh, well, weakling huh? That alone was something that Sanji couldn't help but laugh. He thinks you're weak moss head," he laughed. "What does that make you then, crap cook?" Zoro snarled back. "'Cause I can beat you blindfolded and handcuffed." Sanji's eyes were set ablaze as he glared at him. "What did you just say?" he yelled. "You heard me," he yelled back, his thumb instinctively flicking a sword out. "Can you two grow up for 5 minutes?" Nami demanded hotly. "Seriously though, how were you captured, Zoro? That's all in the past, so what's it matter?" he yelled same time that Kobe yelled. "No, you're so wrong," he screamed, moving forward and explaining, "He's as violent as a demon and 3 times as horrifying." "That I can't disagree with," Sanji said grinning. Zoro growled, wondering if Luffy would let him get away with killing Sanji. He was just a cook after all, you can find one anywhere, they could always get a new one. Kobe blinked as if realizing what Luffy just said and asked carefully, "Why are you asking about him anyway?" Luffy only grinned back as he answered, "I figure if he's good enough I'll ask him to join my crew." Once again, Kobe's mouth fell open and he froze up, just like how he had done when Luffy told him about his dream of becoming the king of the pirates. Chasing him down is just plain reckless. Kobe yelled at him, "You never know, he might jump at the chance to join." Luffy said optimistically. "Not quite," Zoro said softly to himself. He never really thought about it. It was just the idea of becoming a pirate never once came to his mind. He never once called himself a bounty hunter, he was, and would always be first and foremost, a swordsman. But it was strange now that here he was and was proud to call himself a straw hat pirate. He's a bad enough guy that the Marines caught him. Kobe shouted out and began to shout out how impossible it would be, much like before, and once again it ended the same way. "Ow, why'd you hit me?" he complained, eyes watering in pain. "'Cause I felt like it," Luffy answered bluntly and the darkness appeared again. "Interesting," Robin said softly, not really seeing the darkness as they thought about what they had seen. "Merely because of a rumor he heard, he went to go find you and see for himself what kind of person you were." "So that's really what happened?" Usopp asked. "Luffy went out to find you and you joined." "I'm afraid that it's a little more complicated than that," Zoro confessed. "You did have quite the reputation of being a brutal killer back in the East Blue," Nami reminded him. "Hey," he said in annoyance. "I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of, but I don't regret anything I did." "Well, there was one thing. So how did you and Luffy-san meet, Zoro-san?" Brook asked interested. He had always known that Zoro had been the first to join Luffy's crew, and he was now burning with curiosity to know how such a strong friendship had first started. He hadn't forgotten about the sacrifice that Zoro had been willing to make back at Thriller Bark, and he had always been struck by the amount of trust the two seemed to have in each other. He didn't have to wonder long though, for the sun came back and they were still out at sea. Luffy was sitting up on the figurehead of the little boat while Kobe held onto the sail. What a day. It's gorgeous, Luffy called out, stretching out and breathing in the salty air. If we continue on this heading, we should reach the marine base in no time at all, Kobe told him, looking happier than they had seen him yet. Wow, Kobe, you're great out here, Luffy said, looking back at him with a grin. You mean we're actually going to reach the place we originally set out for? Why does he sound so surprised? Nami sighed, knowing that her captain's sense of directions was almost as messed up as Zoro. Really, how can any people who are so aware of their surroundings be unable to tell which way was north or south? Of course, it's nothing. I'm just using the skills that every sailor should have, Kobe answered as Luffy laughed up on the figurehead. You would think so, Nami sighed, rolling her eyes. We'd be lost without you, Nami Swan. Sanji swooned as he stared at her love-struck. Don't I know it, she said, I'm amazed that you guys could last long without any idea of where you're going. At least we're not greedy thieves like someone I could mention, Zoro snapped back. Take that back, Moss head. Sanji threatened. No one dares insult my Nami like that. Just speaking the truth, idiot cook, he answered. I'll kill you, Sanji snarled. I'd love to see you try, Zoro yelled back. Come on, both of you, Usopp said, trying to get some peace between them. Let's just watch the memories. If we keep going like this, it looks like we might be able to see how we all joined. Oh, really? Chopper asked, eyes bright. Now that would be amazing to see. Brook called out excitedly, hoping that he would get to see more. He regretted the fact that he had only spent a short amount of time with the Straw Hats before they were separated. He always wished that he had such a strong connection between them. Though he knew it wasn't the same thing, he hoped that by watching these, he could gain a closer understanding of them all. He had already learned more than he ever thought about his captain, and though it had been hard, he felt honored to have seen what kind of a man he chose to follow. You know there's nothing to be so giggly about, Kobe scolded him, fixing his glasses as Luffy gazed back at him. Because at the marine base they're holding the great pirate hunter, Roronoa Zoro. Zoro smiled proudly at his title, but less so when Kobe finished. This is the man who has diced up his bounties like an animal bent on carnage. A bloodthirsty beast. He's been called nothing less than a living, breathing demon in human form. Who are they calling a demon? He demanded. Well, he's possessed by something, but I can't tell if it's a demon or not, Usopp said, looking at Zoro, who glared at him through his one eye. What was that? He snarled as Usopp felt his courage fade. Nothing, he squeaked, fading back as Zoro looked back to the scene. But Usopp couldn't help but feel as though Zoro's reputation of a devil wasn't as far-fetched as people thought. Demon, Luffy repeated, looking back to the sea, shielding his eyes against the sun as he looked for any signs of an island. Sounds cool. How could you think being a demon is cool? Kobe demanded fearfully. Zoro was wishing he had a drink. He had always been proud of the reputation he worked so hard for. He never once thought about joining a pirate crew to help him achieve his dream. But if he had to be honest with himself, he was glad that he joined. Though it didn't have such a promising start, it soon changed. He had once traveled around the East Blue with Johnny and Yosaku. They helped to ease a loneliness he had in him that he had been carrying around since he lost Kuina. It had been fun to travel with those two for a short time, but soon they decided to go their separate ways and he had returned to his lonely journey on his own. He didn't think much about it at the time, however, he was used to being on his own. He spent most of his childhood training to be the best. Though he did get along with many of the boys at the dojo, as well as his sensei, he never really had someone who he felt he could trust completely. He stared up at the blue sky, wondering about so many things. It was funny how this one random meeting had changed all that. As soon as he joined, he felt something he had never felt before, friendship, and the more he hung out with Luffy, the more the rubber brain began to grow on him. And for the first time in years, that lonely feeling disappeared and he felt a sense of peace on board with this crew that he couldn't remember having before. He wondered what would have happened if Alvida never let his name slip. Though he had a very good idea, he'd be killed by those corrupted Marines. He smiled to himself, a gentle look coming over his face. But of course no one noticed this as they were watching Luffy, except for Robin, who was also smiling at him, as if she knew what was going through his mind. He's been known to brutally slaughter his victim before he drags them in to collect their bounties, Kobe went on. Anyone who had been crazy enough to stand up to him had ended up cut to pieces. Like Zoro would do that, Chopper said furious. Actually, Zoro said evenly, that's about right. The color in Usopp's and Chopper's faces disappeared as they looked at him. Usopp actually moved a little bit away from him. Well, I'm looking for strong crew members, Luffy told him, and it sounds like he's strong. Just what I heard, Kobe gulped as Zoro grinned proudly. But why would he be in prison? Luffy asked. If he hunts pirates, wouldn't the Marines want him out in the world hunting? Well, that's because, well, Kobe stuttered, unable to think of an excuse. Yeah, why was that? Frankie asked Zoro. I'm sure that you'll find out, he said in annoyance. Just watch and leave me alone. Touchy, Frankie commented as Kobe finally yelled out, I don't know why, but I'm sure that the Marines must have had a reason. Maybe he killed someone important or something. It doesn't matter. I think that you should just forget about it. If he doesn't want to go, why is he guiding Luffy there? Usopp asked. He probably feels that he owes him a lot, which he does, Sanji explained. If he never met Luffy, he'd still be stuck on that pirate ship as a cabin boy. He knows that Luffy wants to meet Moss Head, not sure why he would, he added as Zoro growled at him. But he probably felt that it was the least he could do. Besides, it wasn't like Kobe had anywhere else to go really. And he could have tried to enlist when he got to the marine base. No one could argue with that as Luffy was now waving his arms energetically in the air, having spotted the island. Also, because Luffy-san is his friend, Brook added as he watched the anxious look on Kobe's face as he gulped and turned the sails in so that they could catch the wind. And isn't that what friends are supposed to do? Well said, Frankie said, feeling a little teary-eyed at that. Luffy was so full of energy, he was causing the boat to rock back and forth dangerously, and Kobe had to cling to the side to keep them from tipping. But Luffy didn't notice as they kept getting going. Once they were close enough, they could get a good look at the marine base. The island was made up of tall cliffs, and the town was built right into it. At the top stood the base, towering over them all, and separated by a wall that reminded them of Goa, thought much smaller. So that's the island where you were? Usopp asked in surprise. Yep, Zoro answered bitterly, I only planned on staying for a couple days but I ended up staying for 3 weeks. Do we want to know why? Frankie asked him. Wow, Luffy cried out, eyes wide, it's so big. Kobe was staring up at the marine base, his own eyes bright and as big as coins as he stared up in wonderment. Don't see why he would want to be a marine in the first place, Sanji sighed as they followed them pulling into the docks. Luffy didn't even wait to tie the boat up as he jumped ashore, staring around in excitement. We're here, he cried out happily, now jumping up and down as Kobe quickly tied the boat up himself, and followed after him. The marine base city. And so they began following the two through the crowded market, wondering just when and how they would meet up with Zoro. Speaking of which, Kobe was still following him, trying to convince Luffy of all of the reasons why he shouldn't recruit the swordsman even if he did find him. But Luffy wasn't listening to them as he looked at the food. Well, I haven't made up my mind yet, he confessed, I gotta see if he's a good guy. He's in prison because he's obviously not. Kobe screamed out, stopping dead and yelling in the street. Oh, I tend to disagree with that, Robin said darkly, her hatred for the world government burning like a fire inside her. Yeah, the government doesn't care if you're innocent or not, Frankie growled, still burning at the injustice of Tom being taken away just because he built the Pirate King's ship. He glanced at Robin, knowing the injustice she had been forced to go through. If the world sees you as an enemy, that's reason enough for them, Zoro sighed, remembering those miserable 3 weeks trapped on this island. Hey, is that guy Zoro around here? Luffy asked a man after he bought himself a pair. As if he spoke a curse, they all jumped back in fear, terror on each and every one of their faces. That's the usual reaction when someone hears you're around, Sanji offered, and Zoro responded by a sharp glare. Zoro, why is everyone here afraid of you? Chopper asked in confusion, not liking the fear in everyone's eyes. Don't look at me, he growled, I hadn't done anything to them. Could have fooled me, Frankie said staring around them, you think that you attacked the city or something. Maybe we shouldn't mention the name Zoro around here, okay? Kobe whispered to Luffy quietly. Naturally, Luffy paid no attention as he set off again, Kobe right on his heels. Let's head to the base and check it out, he went on as if nothing happened, you wanna be a marine, right? Well, of course I do Luffy, but I really don't think I'm ready yet, Kobe said timidly. That's for sure, Frankie said. This little guy was practically afraid of his own shadow, he didn't stand a chance against some of the harsh training that the Marines went through. From what I've heard, the man in charge of this place is named Captain Morgan, Kobe finished. But the words were no sooner out of his mouth and townspeople who heard, leapt away in alarm once again, just like they did when Zoro's name was mentioned. Huh? Brook asked, looking confused. Now everyone's freaking out about this Morgan guy. Sanji asked in surprise. Just say a name in this town and the people freak. This town is such a weird place. Luffy laughed as he walked on. I think this whole place is cracking up, Usopp said as Luffy laughed. That was odd, I mean I get that they're scared of Zoro, but why'd they flip when first mentioned the Marine captain's name? Kobe asked, now looking completely lost. I don't know, I've got a bad feeling about this. You aren't the only one, Nami said frowning, as she thought back to when she visited this place. Now that she thought about it, she did recall hearing Zoro's name, suddenly her eyes widened. She remembered how some random person came charging up and punched some idiot in the face when he talked about executing Zoro, straining her memory she could vaguely recall seeing that straw hat. She couldn't believe it. Luffy was here too. It seemed that she kept crossing paths with him before she had any idea who he was. What was going on here? Between me and the Marine captain, the people here hate him more, Zoro explained, interrupting her thoughts. I think I've heard of him, Robin said, frowning as if from some long-lost memory. Are they talking about Axe-Hand Morgan? Yeah, that's him, Zoro said darkly. Odd nickname, why'd they call him that? Frankie asked. Because he had a giant axe instead of an arm, he answered, rolling his eyes. But they were suddenly falling behind Luffy and Kobe, and went charging on ahead after them until they stopped at the marine base's gates near the top of the island. "This looks like the place," Luffy said as they stood at the entrance. "Really?" Sanji asked sarcastically, looking up at the marine symbol on the front door. "I made it," Kobe said with tears in his eyes. He'd started to say more, about his goodbyes to Luffy, but he was already climbing up the wall and looking over at the area. "And he's already causing trouble," Nami stated. "Well, he wouldn't be Luffy, he wasn't," Usopp sighed. "Where's the footholds?" he complained loudly as Kobe screamed at him to get down. "Now, where's this demon?" Luffy asked cheerfully, still looking around. "He's the only person I know who would be happy at the thought of meeting a demon," Usopp said exasperated. "Geez, what's with people?" Zoro asked in deep annoyance, knowing that he was about to get a good look at himself here, though not in a good light. "They wouldn't keep him out in the open," Kobe said, sweat dropped. "He's probably locked away in a prison cell underground." "Not quite," Zoro said darkly. "He would have preferred that, at the least, he'd be out of that hot sun and rain." "Wait, if you weren't held in a cell, then where were you?" Chopper asked just as something caught Luffy's eye. "There he is," Luffy exclaimed in excitement as he jumped off the wall and ran to the other end of the base. "I'm gonna get closer." Zoro sighed, knowing that the cook was going to have a field day with this. He grumpily followed, he wasn't going to like what he saw. Kobe gaped at Luffy before following him, telling him that it couldn't be Zoro. But Luffy had jumped up to the wall much farther around and was leaning over the edge to look at something in the yard. "Kobe, look," he said as Kobe jumped up and struggled to get himself to look over to see what Luffy was talking about. "I'm telling you, he's not," but he gasped as he looked out. Now the rest of the Straw Hats were interested and casually walked through the thick wall to get a good look. As soon as they saw him, Chopper, Brook, and Usopp gasped like Kobe had. There was no doubt about it. It was Zoro. He was tied to a cross-shaped post in the center of the yard with the hot sun beating down on him. He was filthy, and looked exhausted as he hung there, very thin with his black bandana overshadowing his eyes so that they couldn't see his expression. Though weak and obviously starved, they could sense that there was something very dangerous about this man. "EHHHH. Zoro, what happened to you?" he screamed out, running over to get a good look at him. "You mean you've been tied to this post all this time?" 10 more days and it would have been a month, he answered calmly as he also walked forward to get a good look at his past self. "You were tied here for 3 weeks. Nami screamed at him. "What did you live on?" Usopp gasped out. "They gave me enough water to keep me alive," Zoro explained, as he stopped walking, standing just a foot away from himself. But the rest was all determination and spirit. Nothing else. He was standing in front of his past self, and he couldn't think of a more surreal experience. If he had to be honest with himself, he looked like utter crap. Looking at him here and at how far he had come, he could hardly believe that this was the same person he had been over 2 years ago. If someone had told him here that he would be here in the new world with a crew of pirates, he'd told them to go to hell. Was this half-dead man really him? Sanji stood back, taking a good look at the Zoro here. To go almost a month without eating. To him, that was torture of the worst kind. He knew better than anyone what it was like to almost starve to death. He only had enough food for 5 days, how he had stretched it out for 20 until he only had a moldy piece of bread left. He gulped at the memory, violent flashbacks to that god-forsaken rock in the middle of the ocean coming back. "They didn't give you any food?" Sanji asked, surprising Zoro, who had expected him to start taunting at how awful he looked. "No," he answered darkly, "just a mouthful of water once in a while. Nothing else. It's a miracle you weren't anything but bones by the end of this." Brook cried in amazement. "But why were you sticking around?" Usopp said. "All you had to do was cut those ropes and you'd be free." "Do you see me with my swords?" he asked in annoyance. "But you still could have escaped," Nami said, unable to believe that these ropes would be enough to hold him back. Luffy obviously thought that too as he asked Kobe, "If we just untie those ropes he can just walk away." "Oh, don't be such an idiot, Luffy," Kobe yelled in fright. "There's no telling what a bandit like him will do if you let him go. He might just kill us both." Zoro rolled his eye. Now he wasn't known for his social skills, but he wouldn't go and kill someone who would help him. "Don't worry, I'm strong," Luffy said unconcerned. "I can protect us." Kobe was crying, obviously thinking that Luffy lost his mind. But the more that Zoro thought about it, the more he began to wonder that if he and Luffy had to fight, which one of them would win. He and Luffy did have a disagreement back at Whiskey Peak, but come on, that was way back then and they didn't even finish it. Though he knew all Luffy's weaknesses, the same held true to Luffy, plus the captain was so unpredictable that it would be impossible to know. He grinned to himself, wondering if the two of them could ever have a real fight like that someday, not to the death of course. But because they would probably be each other's most dangerous opponents. Just then, his past self sensed that he was being watched and looked up to see through the present-day Zoro and to the wall where Luffy and Kobe were. "You too," he growled at them, clearly irritated. His eyes were exhausted, but they still glared fiercely up at them, hearing Kobe squeal in fear. "You're an eyesore, get lost. There are those people's skills hard at work," Frankie muttered with sarcasm. Zoro didn't look at him as he continued to stare at his past self. But he could hear Kobe behind him, once again begging Luffy to just leave. "Luffy, trust me, there's no way you'll survive with someone like him on your crew," he cried out. The rest of the Straw Hats, however, were taken aback at the thoughtful expression on Luffy's face. Normally, it was easy to tell what was going on inside his head, but here, he had the perfect poker face as he looked at Zoro. "Even if he agrees to join your crew, he'll always be your enemy, your life will be in danger," Kobe continued on, but still Luffy wasn't budging as he looked. "Wish I knew what he was thinking," Frankie said, glancing from Luffy to the two Zoros, but as his eyes found the present-day Zoro, he saw that their Zoro was wearing the exact same expression that Luffy had here. Like they were both thinking the exact same thing as they looked over the prisoner here. "Zoro?" Chopper asked, also noticing the strange look on his face. "What is it?" Zoro didn't answer, he just kept looking, lost in his own thoughts. Their attention was so focused on him that, at first, they didn't notice that someone else had appeared. Kobe had stopped talking and Robin looked back in time to see that a little girl had climbed up besides them. "Who's that?" she asked, and everyone, including Zoro, looked back to see her. She was a cute little girl with big black eyes and her brown hair tied back with pigtails as she looked to Luffy and Kobe. She put a finger to her lips, silently telling them to be quiet as she glanced around cautiously and lowered a rope down the other side and climbed down. Kobe had been so stunned, that it wasn't until she had reached the ground on the other side did he snap out of it and screamed for Luffy to stop her as she ran to Zoro, holding a tiny package to her chest. The Straw Hats all moved back so that they could watch her come up to him with a kind smile. "What did you want?" Zoro asked her impatiently. "I thought you might be getting hungry now. So I made you a couple rice balls," the girl told him, as she held up the wrapped package and began to untie it. "You've got a death wish, kid," Zoro said bluntly. "Just scram. But you haven't eaten anything the whole time you've been tied up," the girl said persistently as held up the 2 rice balls for him. "Here, I've never really made them before," she went on so that he could see them, "but I did my best and I think they're fine. They look good enough to eat," Usopp said, suddenly starving. Sanji, however, was looking at the hungry look in Zoro's eyes as he stared at the food before he turned his nose up at them. "Listen, kid, I'm not hungry. Now stop irritating me and get out of here. You really wanna die here?" Sanji scolded him. "You may think you can last, and maybe you can, but you should never disrespect food." "Believe me, I wanted to eat them," Zoro said in annoyance. "But if she had helped me, she could have been killed." "Killed?" Robin repeated in surprise. "Wait for it and you'll see," he answered, looking at the Rika's hurt expression. "But," she started and Zoro seemed to lose his temper. "Do not make me kick your ass, little girl," he yelled at her. "What can you do tied there?" Frankie asked, eyebrows raised. "You could have told her to leave a little more gently, Zoro-san," Brook reminded him. "I said to wait for it," he growled, and right on cue, the obnoxious voice drifted over the courtyard. Now, no one likes a bully," called the familiar, taunting voice that made him want to break something. Everyone, memory and not, glanced up to see a skinny and lanky-looking young man with light blonde hair shaped like an oval on top of his head coming towards them. He had a smug smile on his face as he tugged at the collar of his shirt, acting as if he owned the town. "Who's that?" Brook asked. "That would be Helmeppo," Zoro said, rolling his eye. "Wait, that same Helmeppo that we met with Kobe at Water 7. Chopper asked in surprise. "Wow, you'd never guess it," Sanji said, impressed. "A lot can change in a short amount of time." The Zoro that was tied to the post gave them all an angry look as he slowly came towards him. "Roronoa Zoro, you seem to be handling this well," Helmeppo said, still in that mocking tone, "don't you agree?" "Look now, there's another weird guy," Luffy said from where they were on the wall. The Straw Hats moved back towards them so that they could hear. "That's great. He must be with the Marines," Kobe said, smiling. "Now we know the girl will be safe." Zoro snorted, knowing full well that girl could have gotten hurt thanks to that idiot. Kobe needed to wake up and see that just because you're considered a Marine, makes you far from a saint. Helmeppo walked over at the girl, looking at the rice balls. "Oh, looky. Some tasty rice balls," he said, and he snatched on up and took a big bite out of it. "Hey," she cried out, "that's not for you." "Oh, he knew," Zoro said in annoyance, looking angry at what was going to happen next. Helmeppo stopped and made a face of disgust as he spit it out. "Too sweet," he screamed, dropping the rest of the food to the ground. "He's not," Sanji roared, looking furious that he would let a perfectly good rice ball go to waste. "He did," Zoro answered dully as Helmeppo screamed, "they're packed with sugar. You're supposed to use salt, you idiot, salt." "But I thought it would taste better sweet," she said, blinking in surprise, not really understanding what she did wrong. And then Sanji was burning in rage when he watched Helmeppo knock the other ball to the ground and stomped it into the dirt. "No, stop," the girl pleaded, trying to grab it, but couldn't get close without her risking her fingers getting stomped on. "I worked so hard." "That's terrible," Chopper yelled, his heart going out to that little girl. "He's the only bully around here," Usopp agreed, looking like he wanted nothing more than to have a few words with that jerk. When he finally stopped destroying the food, they looked to see nothing but a pile of rice and mud with a giant shoe print on it. The girl sat there on the ground staring at it, tears welling up in her eyes. But she choked out, I worked so hard to make those. Hearing those words only served to make Sanji even angrier than before, making him long to break this guy's face in. While it may not have the same taste as a normal rice ball would, it would still have been good to eat, Sanji said darkly, furious that anyone would disrespect food like that in front of the one who worked to make it. That was the ultimate insult to any chief. To throw away food they worked so hard to prepare. He remembered all the mistakes he made back when he was still learning how to cook. Putting sugar in a rice ball was minimal compared to some of the mistakes that he made. At least a sweet rice ball could still be enjoyed. The things he made were barely edible, and even then he had eaten every last bite of it no matter how terrible it was. He could tell that this girl put her heart and soul into making this food for a starving man, and not only that but they were her first rice balls. And to see them treated like garbage must truly felt like a slap in the face for her. Too bad, Helmeppo sighed, looking like he couldn't have cared less for her feelings as he took out a piece of paper from his jacket. You must not have read the notice that was posted. Those who assist criminals in any way will be executed. Signed Marine Captain Morgan. The girl turned pale and looked up at him in fear as they all glared at him. It seems even little brats fear my daddy. Helmeppo asked cockily. His daddy? Luffy's voice repeated from behind them. So that guy's father is Captain Morgan. Kobe repeated in astonishment. That doesn't mean that he can go around and treat people like this. Chopper cried out furiously, wishing that he could comfort the girl. But didn't he say that they'd be executed? Nami said, suddenly anxious for the little girl. She did try to feed Zoro. What? Usopp cried out fearfully, you don't think that he'd have no honor as a man if he'd do something like that to a child? Brook cried out, his hand on his sword. He doesn't, Zoro growled. Though he was a jerk, I don't think he'd go that far. Watch. Helmeppo turned towards one of his men. You, toss this kid out right now. The soldier suddenly stepped back, looking terrified at the order. When he didn't move, Helmeppo grabbed him by the front of his shirt and yelled, I said throw her over the wall, soldier. Now if you're not gonna follow my orders, I'll tell my father. Yes, sir, I'll do it. The Marine stuttered as he walked towards the girl. Oh, come on, Frankie cried out. We sure this is the same punk we met back at Water 7? That guy at least had the guts to take on Zoro before. This one. He trailed off as he watched the soldier pick the girl gently up and quietly told her to curl up into a ball as he tossed her over. Screaming in horror, Chopper went running through the wall, looking ready to grab her, but Luffy was already way ahead of him. He jumped, stretching out his arms, he grabbed her and held her tightly as they both hit the ground hard. Thank goodness, Nami sighed in relief, as Kobe jumped down and ran over to them as the girl sat up, thanking him. For a second, I thought that she was going to get hurt. Zoro didn't say anything, but a part of him was also greatly relieved. He didn't want that kid to get hurt because she only wanted to help him. Seriously, is this really the same guy? Frankie repeated to himself, scratching his head with a massive hand, could have fooled me. What a bilge rat, Sanji growled, wishing he could have kicked him when he met him. Zoro didn't say a word as he went back inside the wall to watch himself growling out insults at Helmeppo, who cackled. You're just dead set on staying alive, aren't you? He asked. Zoro raised his eyebrows. Of course he was, because the alternate was to die. That's right, past Zoro snarled at him. I'm gonna make it through the month without any problems. This only caused Helmeppo to laugh again. Right, good luck with that, he sneered as he walked away. Only 10 days left, Zoro called after him. Oh, you still assume you'll make it to the end of those 10 days, Helmeppo replied smugly as he left the prison yard. Once the other Straw Hats had made sure that the girl was alright, they realized that both Luffy and Zoro were gone and went back inside through the wall to see what was happening now. Hey, Usopp called, where'd that jerk go? He left, Zoro answered him bluntly, his eye going to Luffy who was standing directly in front of the crippled memory version of Zoro. They both looked hard at each other, as if sizing each other up. What was going through your mind here? Robin asked him curiously. Dunno, Zoro confessed, trying to think back. He remembered thinking that he had no idea who this twerp was, and he wasn't interested. But he was curious that he had come in after seeing the little girl get thrown out. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel as if he was on display and anger had boiled in the pit of his stomach as he watched the kid looking at him. While at the same time, he remembered thinking that this kid wasn't like anyone he'd met before. What it was, he wasn't sure. But he was stuck by how unafraid that the punk was of him. Luffy honestly didn't seem afraid of him. It could have been that he was tied to that post and half dead, but still, that had never happened before. So, I hear you're a bad guy. Luffy finally asked, breaking the silence. You're still here? Zoro asked in a bored tone, clearly telling him to get lost. You're stuck out here for all the world to see and nothing. Are you really that strong? Luffy asked bluntly. Bet you love that, Frankie said as Zoro ignored him. Because the sad fact was, he could see what Luffy meant, he looked far from impressive here. Mind your own business. Zoro snapped as Luffy sighed and moved closer, still looking over him curiously. It was hard to tell what was going on through either of these two minds. Luffy suddenly smiled. If I were you, I'd probably starve to death in 3 days. Probably, Sanji sighed, his hand in his hair. Even when the guy's out cold, he's sleep eating. I've got more spirit than you could ever have, Zoro retorted, giving him an evil smirk. Which is how I'm gonna survive this ordeal. This I swear. Luffy just shook his head as he turned. Huh, what a weirdo, he said, about to leave. But as he took a few steps away, Zoro suddenly called him back. What were you going to do? Usopp asked, interested, not liking the wild look in the starved Zoro's face. Zoro didn't look at him, feeling embarrassed at this but not regretting what he did. He watched as his past self gazed down at the rice ball, asking for Luffy to pick it up for him. Looking surprised at the request, Luffy did so, picking up what was left of it. You're gonna eat this? He asked, looking over the rice, and picking out a few pebbles. Cause it's mostly a ball of mud. Shut and give it me. Now, Zoro shouted impatiently, not sounding like his usual calm self that he was using before. Luffy stared at him, along with the other straw hats, before he threw it into his mouth. At once, Zoro swallowed every bit of it, choking on the mud and dirt. Should have listened to me, Luffy said as Zoro composed himself. It was good, Zoro whispered, surprising them all again. They couldn't see his face, but Zoro's voice had gratitude as he said, thanks for the food. Oh, Brook said, feeling touched by the scene, his hand over his ribcage. Luffy's eyes suddenly softened and he was smiling in an oddly kind way, as if seeing something that no one else could see. And that was the last thing that any of them saw as the scene faded away, leaving them all trying to digest what they just witnessed. Wow, you were willing to eat that? Chopper asked him, his eyes still bright. Zoro didn't say anything, they knew that he was desperate enough. And more than anything, he was touched that Kid had been willing to bring food for him like that. Anyway, he didn't want to give that idiot's son the satisfaction that he got away with that. Sanji didn't say anything else either, but he was truthfully unable to find anything to say to that. Knowing that girl's food did end up going into his mouth, and still saying that it was good would mean the world to her. But then, why the hell does Mosshead still say that his own cooking was crap? He never once got a compliment from the green-haired idiot and felt anger burning again, but Robin was asking something else. But they didn't say how you got there. She asked him, why were you standing there and taking all that? Yeah, if you hunted pirates, you think that they'd be grateful for you and leave you alone, Brook asked. I had my reasons, he snapped at them, probably why Rika wanted to help me in the first place. Rika, Usopp repeated before understanding, oh, you mean that little girl. Yeah, Zoro said, I'm sure you're about to find out. And that was when the scene came back. They were all piled in what looked like an alley with Luffy and Kobe sitting with the same girl. Luffy had just sat down on a barrel as he told her how Zoro ate her food. Really? Rika cried out, her eyes wide with happiness. That's right, Luffy nodded smiling at her ecstatic expression. He ate every last grain of rice there was. That's great, she said in relief, truly touched by that. Yeah, you just made her day, Sanji answered, breathing out more smoke, feeling an odd sense of gratitude that Zoro had done something like that for her. Was it really good? Chopper asked, not sure why anyone would want to eat a rice ball off the ground when it had been stepped on. When you go 3 weeks without eating, you're willing to devour just about anything, he told him firmly. I had to eat it, why? Because I'm a survivor. It really wasn't that bad anyway, tough to swallow, but all the sugar she put in covered up the taste of mud. I wonder if Zoro really is as evil as everyone thinks that he is, Kobe said softly to himself, stunned by what Luffy had just told him. Still, everyone says he's a beast. He's not, Rika defended loudly, looking angry for half a second before she looked down at her hand and finished, he's good, because, he got himself punished, for us. Zoro felt his turn a little red at that, as he looked away. Zoro-san, Brook asked, looking at him, what does she mean? Refusing to answer him, he was saved when Luffy asked what she was talking about. And that was how she explained what was going on. Almost a month ago, Helmeppo had owned a vicious dog that he brought with him everywhere as it terrorized the whole town. But when the dog entered her mother's restaurant and started scaring everyone, Rika had enough and tried to get rid of it herself. That was when the animal tried to kill her, however, she was saved by Zoro, who just happened to have been in there enjoying a meal. After he had killed the hound, Helmeppo saw this as a crime towards himself, so he ordered Zoro to stay imprisoned for 30 days otherwise he would execute Rika and her mother. And Zoro accepted the offer. It's been 3 weeks since that day. Helmeppo keeps punching and kicking him while he's been tied up, Rika said, sounding upset, he's being so unfair. That was when she started to cry, I don't know how to help him. So that's it, Robin said, smiling at Zoro, who refused to look at her or anyone else. I can see why you're upset, Kobe whispered, as all this sunk in. Like his dreams of becoming a brave marine were shriveling up as they spoke. Wow, that's truly selfless, Zoro-san, Brook whispered, staring at him with new respect. That was super thing to do, bro. Frankie called out proudly as Chopper hugged his leg. He could have just left, but he chose to stay and risk his life for a little girl and her mother. It doesn't get more selfless than that. Who would have thought that there was something in you that wasn't out for blood, Sanji offered. That's a nasty way to give a compliment, Zoro glared at him. But he let it go. He could admit it, the truth was, he was a born killer capable of showing no mercy during combat, and he had killed before. However, those people he killed had deserved it, but a little girl who didn't do anything wrong didn't deserve to die. If he stood back and did nothing, his own honor would have been at stake. But what I don't understand is why you believed he would keep a promise like this. Robin asked him. Zoro was a very untrusting individual, almost as much as she was. It seemed unheard of that he would trust someone like that to keep his word. Didn't have a choice, he answered bitterly. I didn't think that they would be low enough to do something like that. But before she could think of something to say, there were crashes going on inside the building behind them. Rika's eyes were wide and she went running in, crying out anxiously for her mother. Suddenly having a bad feeling about this, they all followed, but Nami was in the front, wondering if this was where she would see it. It was a comfortable-looking little restaurant inside, and there was a woman who looked a lot like Rika, who could only be her mother, was standing behind the bar. She was looking fearfully at Helmeppo, who had sat down and put his table up on the table, messing up a bowl of fruit. I'm hungry, bring us whatever you have and keep the check for yourself. He called obnoxiously. And bring me a bottle of your finest moonshine or whatever crap you serve. And put some speed to it, lady, I don't have all day. That piece of shit, Sanji snarled, shaking. He was having a flashback at those damn bandits and how they gave Makino such a hard time. How dare they treat a lady like this? But Nami was looking around, wondering if what she remembered was right. And there she was just a few tables away. She was sitting there with a glass of wine in her hands as she listened into him. It's Nami. Chopper cried out, also noticing it. Yo-ho-ho-ho, Brook said in astonishment. So you made it out of that attack all right. Yeah, I had worse days than that, Nami said, walking over so that she could get a good long look at herself. Nami? Robin asked, but she didn't answer her as she bent down low to get a better look at her past self. It was in much the same way that Zoro was as he had stared when he saw himself in the yard. It must have been a truly strange experience for them to see them here staring at themselves. Helmeppo just laughed as they poured him some wine, turning the attention back on him. I've sure been thinking about something interesting to do since I've been bored out of my skull here, he told them all, and that was when he dropped the bombshell. I've decided to execute Zoro tomorrow. Look forward to it, everyone. He's what? Chopper screamed out in panic. That jerk. Usopp also yelled. 3 weeks and he's just going to kill him off. Zoro shook his head at his own stupidity. He should have been able to guess that they would pull something like this. He thought back to all the punishments that idiot had dealt him while he was tied up. If he had this kind of power then, he would have sliced that idiot up to pieces, he wanted to. After everything you did, he was just going to break his promise just like that. Brook asked him at once. He shrugged. There's always a chance he was just joking, but I highly doubt that, he answered. He wouldn't joke about something like this, Robin sighed. He honestly means it. He has no honor. Brook yelled heatedly, to go back on his word like that. You aren't the only one who thinks that, Sanji stated, as Luffy's eyes turned dangerous. There was a deep anger burning in them, leaving no trace for mercy. And then instinctively, he went charging ahead, and before anyone else could tell what happened, Luffy punched him so hard that he was sent flying across the room and smacked against a wall. About time someone hit him, Frankie said, grateful that someone shut him up. That's what I call getting what you deserve, Usopp said as he and Chopper both cheered Luffy on, hoping for another punch. You just hit me. Helmeppo demanded as he grabbed his swollen cheek, sitting up, unable to believe it. I think that his brain was damaged when he hit the wall, or what was left of it anyway, Sanji smirked. What else did he think just happened? How can he not see that coming? Nami demanded, smiling. Yes, there's only so much that a person can take before they finally snap and fight back, Robin agreed softly. But it was clear that Luffy was far from done. He moved forward, looking ready to give him another attack, and probably would have if Kobe hadn't run over and restrained him. But knowing how strong Luffy was, they knew that he could have easily have thrown him off, but stayed where he was as he continued to glare down at Helmeppo. Luffy, no. Kobe pleaded with him, trying to hold him back, you can't hit him. Too late for that, Frankie pointed out, he already did. This guy's scum. Luffy growled as everyone stared at them, stunned that anyone would have the guts to attack him. You actually hit me, Helmeppo yelled like a little kid. I'm Captain Morgan's son, you know. And he's the son of Dragon, Zoro pointed out, with a shrug, but that's hardly the case here, using your father's name to fight is a coward's way out. Because daddy won't be there forever, Sanji agreed, pulling his cigarette out of his mouth for a moment. What's he gonna do once that's taken away? Yeah, like I care. Luffy yelled as moved forward, almost clawing the air to get at him. You'll care after he executes you for this. Helmeppo shouted angrily as tears built in his eyes. What a baby, Usopp said rolling his eyes. Why don't you just be a man and fight? Luffy demanded, holding a fist up, looking ready to go a few rounds. Luffy, just ease off some. Why are you trying to get on the Marine's bad side? Kobe said as he struggled to hold Luffy. With each word that was exchanged, Luffy was growing more and more angry. If this kept up, they knew that he would soon throw Kobe off him as he pummeled Helmpu's face into the floor. Though, they could see that it was possible that the only thing that was keeping him from doing that was because he was afraid of hurting Kobe. Why should he care? He's a pirate, what's wrong with pirates fighting with Marines? Nami asked as she looked up to see that her past self had already taken off. Her eyes saddened at the thought as she looked back to the scene, really not looking forward to when they next meet up. I've made up my mind, Luffy said as his eyes hardened, fierce determination now burning. Today Zoro will join my crew. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Chapter 13, Ace's Warning. Wow, Brook whispered as he watched Helmeppo get back up before running, crying from the room, like a 2-year-old would do when he didn't want to go to bed. So even though he barely knew you, Zoro-san, Luffy-san was standing up for you in your honor. HMPH, just shows that he hasn't changed since he was a kid. Zoro responded unconcerned, thought he felt a sense of gratitude for him for saying that. Get off me, Luffy called, now pulling away from Kobe, though he was still surprisingly gentle so that he hadn't hurt him. However, Luffy didn't seem to realize that everyone was staring at him as he turned to the back door that led to the alleyway and marched right through it. The Straw Hats knew him well enough to guess exactly where he was going. Oh, he's going in to burst you out now, isn't he? Chopper asked, excitement now back in his eyes as he jumped up and down eagerly. Pretty much, Zoro shrugged, saying a silent, thank you, to Luffy by not letting that injustice go by unpunished as they also followed him to the alley. Luffy was already heading up in the direction of the base when they heard Kobe calling behind them. They glanced back to see him bursting through the door with Rika right on his heels. It was clear that he was going to try and stop him, however they knew that once Luffy made up his mind, no one and nothing could stop him. Don't stop me, Kobe. He called back as they stopped running. The two of them were standing side by side in the alley with Luffy's back to them. My mind is made up. What are you going to do? Rika asked fearfully, wringing her hands fearfully. Helmeppo isn't going to let this go. He's going to have you killed. Captain Morgan executed people for less than that. Like to see him try, Luffy told her crossly, as he stared down at his fist. That spineless coward deserved it. I'm going to go and burst Zoro out of that dump. I'm touched, Zoro smirked. But Luffy, Kobe yelled, but fell silent at the angry look on Luffy's face when he turned back to glare at him. Is this the kind of Marines you want to join, Kobe? He asked him, because if not, then you can either sit back and take it, or stand up to them. Kobe blinked, trying to figure out what he should do. But Luffy didn't seem to expect an answer as he gave them both the thumbs up and without another word, he ran ahead, heading for the direction of the Marine base. Why are we always running? Nami panted, now tired of this. Don't have time to wait around, Usopp yelled. Luffy had to hurry or Zoro could have been executed a lot sooner than tomorrow. Oh, it was much sooner did they try, Zoro said, thinking back bitterly. So they really did try to kill you? Brook cried in outrage, after you've been upholding your end of the deal. How dishonorable. Well, it doesn't really matter at this point, he confessed, thinking back to that heart-stopping moment where he was tied, helpless, to that post and had those guns pointed at him. He couldn't have ever rested in peace if he died in such a pathetic way, unable to even defend himself. Luffy didn't stop running until he reached the wall and easily jumped it to stand on top so that he could look around. After passing through the wall, they saw that Zoro was still tied there, and apparently sleeping. Typical, Nami said to him, going closer so that she could make sure that he was only sleeping. Even held up like this, you can fall asleep. You need to sleep as often as you can, because you need the energy to fight at a moment's notice, he told her coldly. But what about all the times you were attacked when you were asleep? Chopper asked innocently, but Zoro responded with a nasty look that caused Chopper to hide behind Robin. Robin bent down to whisper to him, maybe now isn't the best time to remind him. Chopper. Luffy jumped down next to them and stood in front of Zoro, much like how he did before, only this time there was a determined look in his eyes. They were wondering why he didn't do anything but watch, why not wake him up and untie him. However, Zoro seemed to sense that he wasn't alone anymore. His eyes snapped open and he stared ahead of him, breathing a little harder than normal, at least until he saw who it was who woke him up. Zoro knew the reason. He had a dream of Kuina and how she had taunted him into growing stronger. He had forgotten where he had been for a minute there. You again, don't you have things to do? Zoro huffed in annoyance, clearly wanting to be left alone. I'll untie you but only if you promise to join my crew, Luffy stated bluntly. Well, he doesn't beat around the bush, does he? Frankie asked with a bark of laughter. Just comes right out and says it, doesn't he? Memory. Zoro stared at him. You're what? He said, sure that he heard wrong. I thought I was hallucinating. Zoro told them all, that the heat had finally got to me and I was starting to see things. I run a pirate crew, I'm looking for people to join up, Luffy explained as he walked closer. Zoro blinked before he understood. No way, he said coldly, stopping Luffy. I'd never stoop to joining a criminal. Screw that business. Wait, so you didn't want to join? Chopper asked him in confusion. Not at first. The pirates I met up till Luffy were all a bunch of greedy slimeballs, Zoro told him, folding his arms. I may have been down on my luck here, but I wasn't so desperate enough to ask for help from a pirate. That's normally what people think of when they hear someone's a pirate, Nami agreed, having thought much the same until she met him and Luffy. She had always believed that a pirate crew was just a murdering band of monsters who ruined people's lives. It was a great weight off her shoulders to know that's not the case. And what's wrong with being a pirate? Luffy demanded, hands at his sides, and looking at him interestedly, wondering what he was going to say. They're despicable, like I'd ever want to join up with one. Zoro retorted honestly. Fate sure has a strange way of changing minds, present-day Zoro muttered thoughtfully. But how much could that have really damaged your reputation? Nami asked him in a teasing tone, you were already considered to be a living, breathing demon after all. One would expect you to become a pirate sooner or later. Shut up, he snapped back at her. Oh, come on, give me a break, Luffy spoke up, speaking what Nami had just said. Everyone already knows you as some vicious bounty hunter who's always out for blood. People can say whatever they want about me, Zoro said to him firmly, but there isn't a single thing I've done in my life that I regret. His exhausted face then split into a rather twisted smile that sent chills up everyone's spines. Looking really scary there, Zoro, Usopp whispered, gulping. And I meant every word, he answered truthfully. I never considered myself to do justice. But I didn't consider myself evil either. Then whose side were you on? Chopper asked him in confusion. The only side that mattered to me at the time, Zoro answered simply. My own. I will make it through this challenge, Zoro in the memory said, without any trace of hesitation or doubt, and after that I'll accomplish what I want. Zoro nodded with what his past self just said, glad to see that at least this part of him hadn't faded over 2 years. Yeah, that's great, Luffy muttered slowly before he folded his arms, and looked away. But I've already decided that you're gonna be on my crew. And if he says he wants something, he usually gets it, Nami sighed, although she was smiling as he said that. What? You can't do that. Memory Zoro yelled, completely losing his previous cool, and looking deeply irritated. I think he just did, Frankie laughed. That rubber idiot could never take no for an answer, Sanji sighed, thinking how many times Luffy asked him to join when they met. I hear you're one of the best swordsmen around. Luffy suddenly asked. Well, I am, Zoro said at once while the present-day Zoro fought the urge to sigh. He knew that he was good all right, but back then, he knew he was nothing. Mihawk was right, he had no idea how big the world really was. But that idiot captain's son took mine away, Memory Zoro finished speaking. Guess I'll just gotta go get it back for you, Luffy offered before he smirked. What? Zoro asked, unable to believe what he was saying. I didn't think he'd be crazy enough to do that, Zoro said to the rest of them. Hopefully you got used to it quickly, Sanji added as they all nodded in agreement. So if you want your sword you'll just gonna have to join my crew, Luffy told him with a laugh. Now you're really pissing me off. Zoro shouted as he fought to get off the post, looking like he wanted to beat Luffy up. Wait, he blackmailed you into joining? Usopp asked, unable to believe it. I doubt that he'd really go that far to force someone to join, Robin giggled, but he knew that you were at the end of the line here. Yeah, Zoro grunted as he thought it over. I know that he never would have forced me to join if I truly didn't want to, but... He stopped speaking, becoming completely lost in thought as he gazed at the scene. Zoro, Chopper asked softly as Frankie looked angry. Hang on a second, he hollered at them all accusingly, you all forced me to join. Well, you didn't have any other choice, Robin smiled deviously at him and he froze at the reminder of what she did to him. You would have been killed for sure if you stayed at Water 7 with that bounty on your head. And besides, she closed her eyes and smiled wider, do you honestly regret joining? Geez, Frankie said, looking away from her, only because you all knew how to gang up on a guy. Forced you to join, Frankie-san. Brooke asked in bafflement. I rather not think about it, Frankie cringed at the memory, moving a little farther from Robin, as if afraid that she would use her powers on him again. Hey genius, the base is in the other direction. Zoro's voice called out, interrupting them, and they looked up in time to see that Luffy had gone running off in the opposite direction of the building in his hurry. Seriously, Nami sighed, her hand on her head. How dense could he be? He's as bad as you are, Zoro. Hey, at least I knew which way the building was. Zoro retorted angrily. Yeah, and it only took you 3 weeks to do that, Sanji laughed in a mean way, quick dodging as one of the swords came slicing through the air at him. Would you both knock it off? Nami snapped at them both, looking ready to bash their heads in. Once Luffy realized his mistake, he stretched out his arms and flew by, with Zoro staring after him. Now I thought for sure that I was hallucinating, Zoro confessed, remembering that he thought he was going crazy. You looked a little freaked out, Frankie laughed at the look on Zoro's face. Hey, I didn't know that there was a rubberman in the world, Zoro said darkly as they ran with Luffy who was dashing around the base, trying to find the swords. Again, he just charges around without a plan. Nami sighed, really, doesn't he ever think things through? Do you really need to ask? Robin asked happily. That's weird, there's nobody here, Luffy said to himself, having completely circled the base. I gotta find that crazy idiot's son and get Zoro's sword back for him, he went on. Just then they heard something on the roof and Luffy looked up. Sounds like there's something's going on up there, Usopp said as Luffy grinned and began to stretch his arm out, and they could tell that he was planning on flying up to check it out. Yeah, I remember hearing something big and heavy breaking now that I think about it, Zoro stated casually, remembering feeling as if there had been an earthquake or a landslide going on. Big and heavy? Sanji asked, eyebrow raised. Well, I think you know who was responsible for that. Why do I suddenly have a bad feeling about this? Nami asked in dread. Gum gum, rocket, Luffy shouted and he rocketed himself up. Much like before, they were able to follow like they were on some kind of invisible elevator so that they could see what was happening. Luffy overdid it on the rocket part of his move and was flying even higher, but they could see just in time that there was an enormous statue of what appeared to be an ugly man with a metal jaw, and a giant axe instead of a right hand that was being heaved up by what looked like all the marines on the island. Luffy grabbed hold of one of the ropes and was able to stop himself from flying off, but it was too much for the men to hold on to as they lost their grip on the rope and it fell. With a cracking sound that seemed to echo around them, the statue's upper half cracked and fell to the ground below them. So that's what happened, Zoro smirked, only wishing he could have seen it the first time. All the marines on the roof were left speechless as they stared at the ruined statue, too scared to move, and it was clear that the truth hadn't sunk in yet. But they all knew that wouldn't last for much longer. That idiot, Nami moaned out. Leave it to him to end up breaking something that big. I guess that an, I'm sorry and I promise never to do that again, will help. Frankie asked, sweat dropped. But Zoro was still grinning. No, it was for the best. It was about time that Marine Captain had his ego deflated. Besides, it was ugly as sin anyway, who'd want to stare at that thing the whole time? Sorry about that, Luffy said softly, them all in a surprisingly meek voice, showing that he understood that he did something bad here. And it was here that they saw a tall man that looked just like the statue, an intimidating man with blonde hair and a steel jaw, and his right hand is replaced by a huge steel axe, the handle of which seems to go right through his forearm. Is that? Brook asked softly, watching the angry veins on the man's forehead standing out violently. Axe hand Morgan, Zoro agreed, and like I said, ugly as sin. Morgan jerkily turned his massive head towards Luffy, his face contorted with such fury that he looked ready to kill. In fact, seize him so I can kill him myself. He bellowed, his eyes practically popping out of his head, almost foaming up like a rabid dog would. Who builds a statue of himself anyway? Frankie asked as the Marines looked like they were gonna wet themselves as they hurried to obey. That's him, screamed a familiar whiny voice, and that was when Helmeppo appeared behind some of the Marines, pointing at Luffy. That's the guy. He's the one who punched me, Daddy. You want a bottle and diaper while you're at it? Sanji muttered in disgust. As soon as he saw him, Luffy actually smiled. Hey, it's you, he said happily, moving so quickly that Helmeppo didn't realize how close he was until he was right in front of him. As soon as he realized Luffy was talking to him, he started to scream and attempted to run, but Luffy quickly grabbed him by his shoulder and easily held him back. I've been looking for you all over the place, Luffy said cheerfully. You have something that I really need to get back. He put Helmeppo in a headlock and dragged him across the roof and through the only open door as the Marines gave chase. Well, that's something that you didn't see coming, Robin laughed as they followed again, now thoroughly enjoying herself as she watched the Marines all panic, wondering what they should do. So the captain's son was attacked and kidnapped all in one day. That's good for him, Brook laughed, following along happily. This was probably the most interesting thing that's happened to him in his life anyway, Zoro said. Someone had to bring him down to earth anyway. Luffy dragged Helmeppo through the base while the wimp screamed in terror the whole time. Okay, so tell me where Zoro's sword is. Luffy finally asked, getting tired of the screaming. I'll tell you, I promise. Just stop dragging me across the carpet, Helmeppo begged, and at once they stopped, so that he was hanging like a rag doll in Luffy's hand. Fine, which way? He asked as Helmeppo weakly pointed behind them. My room. You just passed it, behind you on the left. I should have known he had them, Zoro said in deep annoyance. Figures that idiot would have wanted to feel like a big man by keeping his swords in his sights at all times. Why didn't you say so earlier? Luffy complained, as if it was his fault, as he looked back down the hall. Now we gotta go all the way back. They've got company, Usopp cried out as the Marines finally caught up, and were now pointing their rifles at him. Don't move, one warned, except for letting Helmeppo go. The other added. Right, Sanji said, rolling his eyes. Like he'd do that. Don't want to, Luffy said as he lifted Helmeppo up and held him in front of him like a shield. But you can try shooting me if you want. He didn't, Chopper called out. Zoro smirked. He did. Once Helmeppo saw the guns he started to flail around in panic. No, don't shoot. Get the hell out of the way. He screamed out as Luffy charged ahead with Helmeppo still up in front of him. Now that's a side of Luffy you don't see often, Nami said, also running by the stunned Marines. That was low. Just getting some payback, Robin smiled, having a lot of fun here. I guess that Luffy just wanted to scare him into helping him as well as to make him pay for what he had done to Zoro. Karma can be a bitch, Frankie laughed. It's not like they're gonna shoot while he a hostage, Sanji added. It all works out. They ran back down the hallway, but this time, they spotted a flowered sign on one of the doors that read, "My room." Don't tell me, Frankie said, feeling close to gagging as Luffy stopped and opened the door. This looks like yours, Luffy said, looking around. Odd taste, Robin added once she got a good look at the place. I think I'm gonna be sick, Frankie said, looking at it in disgust. And he calls himself a man. If they didn't know whose room it was, they would have sworn that it belonged to a young girl. The room had pink walls decorated with flowers, pink curtains at the window with flowered plates up on the wall, even with a vanity complete with matching pink furniture. Is there makeup at that? Sanji asked, having violent flashbacks of his time at the Kingdom of Okamas, and his face was twitching horribly at this. Is this guy he gulped, Okama. A drag queen? Usopp asked, staring around. It would explain a lot, Brook added. This looks like it'd be your room, Nami-san. Please, I have much better taste than this. Nami said, looking at the walls, flowered plates. Tacky. Chopper had to cover his nose from the strong smell of the flowers as Luffy glanced over the room and beamed proudly as he spotted the 3 swords up against the wall. Bingo, he said, going up to them. Those don't look like the swords you had before, Zoro-san, Brook said, remembering when he first met him, except for the white one. The 2 black swords got destroyed a while ago, he explained as he watched Luffy looking over them all with confusion. Hold on, there are 3 here, he said to himself before he looked down at Helmeppo. Hey weirdo, which one of these, Zoro? What a wimp, he passed out, Frankie sighed. Luffy had also sighed in annoyance when sounds came through the window. Looking up in surprise, he dropped Helmeppo and went over to see what the problem was. They also followed his lead and Chopper screamed in panic when he saw Zoro and Kobe facing down a firing squad. Kobe! Luffy exclaimed in shock as he went back to grab the swords. What's Kobe doing there? Nami gasped. He was trying to untie me, Zoro explained. He told me about how they planned on executing me, and when they saw him, they decided to kill us both. That's terrible, Usopp yelled, but Zoro tuned them out as he thought back to the words that Kobe had said to him. How he told him what Luffy had done for him, and how the kid had asked him, not to become a pirate but merely to help this one pirate this one time. Zoro knew that he had a lot of strength he could offer Luffy. After all, the rubber brain was the only person who could have saved him from execution, and of course, he was the only one who could save Luffy from the same fate. What was going through your head when you were looking down at those guns? Frankie asked him curiously as Luffy tied the 3 swords to his back and was pulling himself back, ready to launch himself through the window. I remember fantasizing that oversized axe at the end of that coward captain's arm, chopping that head-shaped barnacle at the top of his neck, Zoro lied as he went charging through the wall, already aware of what happened. Zoro! Usopp and Chopper cried out as they all quickly followed him, having jumped down like how they followed the trio of boys in Goa. But Zoro didn't stop running until they were in earshot of the yard, ready to watch. Zoro! What are you? Nami gasped, but at that moment, Morgan appeared and pointed his axe at the 2 as he cried out, fire! No! Usopp, Chopper, and Brook screamed in panic as past Zoro turned away, waiting for death to come. But then, they heard the sound of glass breaking and something was shooting across the sky. With aim that he never had before when he was a child, Luffy had flown from the window and landed directly in front of Zoro and Kobe, shielding them both from the rain of bullets. What? Zoro cried out. Luffy, no! Kobe screamed in terror, tears in his eyes. But their worry wasn't necessary. All the Straw Hats grinned. It was always amusing to see someone find out the hard way that bullets don't work against a rubber person, as Luffy smiled as his body stretched out. See ya! He shouted as he stretched his arms wide, and deflected the bullets back at the Marines, all of them with their eyes bugging out of their heads and screaming in terror. Luffy just laughed as he declared, that won't work on me. Told you I was strong. What's with you, Zoro? Nami asked, grinning as she looked at the stunned expressions on past Zoro and Kobe's faces. I thought we've been through this, Zoro said, rolling his eyes as his memory self demanded to know just what Luffy was. Luffy turned towards them both with a grin. My name's Monkey D. Luffy, he said simply as he gave him a thumbs up, and I'm gonna be king of the pirates. Zoro just stared at him. Finally finding his voice he demanded, you're gonna be king of the pirates. Right, you must be completely out of your rubbery mind. Do you have any idea to what that means? King of the pirates means king of the pirates. How can it mean anything other than that? Luffy asked, as if wondering what else there could be to it. Always finding the simple answer to everything, Robin smiled, I find is one of his most endearing traits. He doesn't think about how much work things take, does he? Nami sighed. I think that part of his brain that plans things out doesn't work. Sanji agreed, he just goes for it and waits to see if it works out. But Kobe was now smiling, his eyes bright as explained to Zoro, yeah, when he first told me it was shocking but he's completely serious. That's how he is I guess. 'Cause he actually seems to have every intention of becoming king of the pirates. He then looked to Zoro and finished, in obtaining the world's ultimate treasure, the One Piece. He sure sounds like a believer now, Usopp said as Luffy broke into a large grin at his words. He has that effect on people, Zoro confessed. Did you think he was crazy too? Nami asked him. Of course I did, he answered her, but then again, my dream is crazy too, so I guess it works. Luffy finished brushing himself off from the bullets and untied the swords from his back. He then turned to Zoro and held them out. Here's what I promised you. There's 3. I couldn't tell which one was yours so I just took all of them. All of them belong to me, Zoro said as he struggled against his bonds, trying to get feeling back into them. I use Santoryu, the 3-sword style. Luffy blinked at him for several seconds, and it couldn't have been clearer than he never heard of such a thing before. Present-day Zoro wasn't surprised at all. After all, he had invented not only Santoryu but most of his own sword techniques. He glanced down to his 3 swords, still at his hip, Kuina's sword, the Wado Ikimonji, which had been with him ever since she had died, Kidetsu III, the sword that chose him back in Logatown, and Shisui, the sword that he received after he defeated Ryuma. These 3 swords had stuck with him through all the challenges he had gone through for the last 2 years, and he wasn't going to disappoint them by giving them anything less than his all. Luffy seemed to snap out of his thoughts as he held them out again, as if expecting Zoro to take them with his arms tied there. Take them already, he said grinning. Just know that if you fight with me now, you'll be a government-defying villain. So it's either that, or you're left out here and killed by the Marines' execution style. He's not giving you a choice, is he? Frankie laughed. Like there was a choice, Zoro grinned at him. If my only 2 choices were to become a pirate, or stay where my days were numbered, then it was fate that stepped in. And in the memory, for the first time, a true grin appeared on Zoro's face. In the present day Zoro remembered the feeling well. He liked this kid, whoever he was. He was just as crazy and stubborn as he was. What are you? The son of a devil. His past self grinned. It doesn't matter. 'Cause if I don't choose your side, I'll just end up dead on these sticks. His eyes narrowed as he finished, so let's do this. So you're finally gonna join my crew. Luffy cheered, completely forgetting the danger they were still in as he danced around happily with the swords. This is the best thing ever. Would you quit celebrating already and cut these ropes off me? Zoro yelled in irritation, wanting to get out of this mess already. Honestly, Zoro added as he watched, he had enough of that dump, he was aching to fight. In the background the whole time, the Marines listened to Morgan explain about the devil fruits, and then finally order his men to charge in and kill them. Right, I forgot about him, Sanji muttered in boredom as they ran towards them with swords while Luffy and Kobe were trying to get Zoro's ropes off. Come on, hurry, Kobe cried out in panic. They got these things on here tight, Luffy muttered in frustration, tugging at them. Come on, quit screwing around. Zoro yelled as he tried to pull himself free, his eyes wide as the Marines got closer. He never was good with knots, Usopp whispered as Luffy muttered something about how the knots got tighter instead of loose. Finally losing it, Zoro yelled out, give me one of my damn swords now. Don't see you losing it often, Zoro-san, Brook said in surprise. Well, when you're about to die then you tend to become desperate, he snapped back when Kobe screamed in terror as the Marines had reached them, ready to cut him to shreds. At once Luffy at that moment handed Zoro one of his swords and with his mouth, he had been able to cut himself free, grabbed the other 2 swords out of Luffy's hands before he stopped the Marines' swords. Though he had been kept there for 3 weeks, he was more than able to hold them all back. Now Zoro, Morgan gasped. Awesome, Chopper cried out, his eyes sparkling. Amazing, Brook added, amazed that someone could be this strong despite being starved and exhausted. Wow, Luffy exclaimed, the ropes in his hands. That's so cool. Zoro still had no problem holding them where they were. You make one move and you die, he warned them all as the Marines froze, tears in their eyes. He's scary, one whimpered. And they call themselves Marines? Nami asked, smacking her forehead. You forget that this is the East Blue, Robin pointed out, the Marines here aren't like the ones in the Grand Line. With the Marines now too scared to move, Zoro looked up to Luffy and said, today I officially become a criminal, having fought the Marines. So I will become a pirate, that I can promise you. He narrowed his eyes as he glared at his new captain as he added, but I want you to know one thing. While I'm with you, the only thing I dedicate myself to is fulfilling my own ambitions. This piqued Luffy's interest, which is, present-day Zoro's eye saddened, feeling a little bit of shame at the words he was going to say. But he had traveled far and wide, searching for one man, and he wasn't willing to give up his dream without a fight. To be nothing less than the world's greatest swordsman, Zoro proclaimed, his shadowed eyes seemed to give him the look of a man possessed. If somewhere along the way I have to give that up, I then want you to accept responsibility. After which you get to apologize to me at the end of a sword. The Straw Hats all stared at him in disbelief, looking from the past Zoro to the one standing with them with wide eyes. Whoa, wait a second. Usopp called out loudly to the Zoro next to him, you mean to tell us that you made Luffy promise if he ever got in your way, you'd have him kill himself? Basically, Zoro answered coolly. His face gave away no emotion, but his eye did seem to soften as he looked at the scene. Once again wondering just when that vow no longer mattered, how he began to feel how his captain's dream seemed to become more important to him than his own of defeating the Hawk. Relax, he added, at their horrified expressions. I don't intend for him to ever fulfill it. Do you still feel that way? Robin whispered to him as the others looked relieved and turned back to watch Zoro scaring the Marines. Especially how you made that deal with Kuma at Thriller Bark. He stared at her. How'd you? He hissed. Forgive me, she whispered back, I overheard, but I didn't tell anyone else about it. Zoro sighed in relief as he looked ahead to the others. So you, Brook, and Mr. Nosebleed all know. But Luffy and the others don't, Robin reassured him. I knew that you'd want that kept quiet from everyone, especially from Luffy. Of course, how do you think he'd take that if he knew? Zoro asked her crossly. Besides, that's ancient history. I survived. She gave him a thoughtful expression. Yes, and it is a blessing, but after seeing this, you've come a long way since then. It changes nothing, he told her firmly. I like to think of it as finally paying my debt to him for saving me back here. So we don't owe each other anything, at least that's what I used to think. Robin just looked at him. Besides, he finished, after fighting beside him all this time, I found that I have a new goal in mind to work for. I don't know when it happened, but I realized that if you can't even protect your captain's dream, then what hope do you have for your ambition? What's your new goal? She asked with a smile. I think it's the same as yours, he answered, and she smiled a little bigger. Sanji happened to overhear the whole thing as well, but kept quiet as he kept his eyes on this. You'd never have guessed Moss Head was the same person he was here fighting Marines. In some ways he was still the same idiot who kept getting lost in a straight line. But in other ways he was completely different. He frowned, suddenly thinking of the person he was when he was still working at the Bharati. If they were going to see that, what would he see of himself? He suddenly understood why he and Nami had been staring so intently at their past selves. Luffy was smiling, as if he had expected Zoro to say something like that. The world's greatest swordsman, huh? He repeated, sounds pretty good. The king of the pirates wouldn't have anything less than the best on his crew. Damn right, Usopp smiled proudly. Memory Zoro returned Luffy's smile. Big talker. From this point on, no matter if I'm a criminal or not, I will spread the name Zoro throughout the world. Looks like you got your wish, Zoro-san, Brook told him happily. What are you standing there frozen for? Morgan yelled, once again forgetting he was here. I want you to kill all three of them right now. The Marines seemed completely lost to what they were supposed to do. It was hard to say who they were more afraid of. They seemed terrified of what Morgan would have done to them if they didn't obey, but they clearly didn't want to risk moving with Zoro's threat over their heads. Thankfully, Luffy solved that problem as he raised his leg, telling Zoro to duck. Gum gum, whip, he screamed, and in one fluent move, he stretched his leg across, hitting all the Marines that Zoro held up, with Zoro ducking just in time. Kobe was cheering him on as Zoro got back to his feet, asking him, wanna tell me what you are? I'm just a guy who ate the gum gum fruit, Luffy explained, kicking his leg out happily. Zoro looked completely lost as he asked, what's a gum gum fruit? I'm almost sorry I asked, Zoro smirked at his own stupefied expression. A rubberman, one of the Marines that Luffy just hit, cried out in disbelief. It looks like he does have devil fruit powers, Morgan growled, his eyes narrowed in hatred. Another one of his subordinates looked up and exclaimed, Captain, we don't stand a chance against them. Yeah, just look at them. Another one added, pointing. They're insane. That's usually the reaction we get, Usopp said laughing. I often think that myself, Sanji added, we had to be to chose to follow such a crazy captain. But he was smiling the whole time, showing that he didn't regret it either. We couldn't even take Zoro on by himself. They pleaded with their captain, and it wasn't a secret. These guys honestly didn't stand a chance against the two of them. With every word they said, Axe Hand Morgan's face seemed to grow angrier as he glared at them all, looking angry enough to kill each and every one of them. This is a direct order. He bellowed out. Every Marine who sprouted weakness, pull your guns out and shoot yourselves. What? Chopper screamed out in horror. How could any leader demand that? Brook demanded, liking his memory less and less with each second. But Morgan kept his axe raised threateningly. I can't do anything with weak soldiers. That's no way to treat your own men. Brook cried out, fury pouring through his bones. These men did their best to follow his orders, but he honestly cared nothing for any of them. Even pirates treated each other better than this. Teesh, if I could, I'd give him a pounding he wouldn't forget, Frankie growled, holding up a massive hand. Damn, this is what I hate about a memory. We can't do anything. Deal with it, Sanji sighed, throwing his cigarette away. We all feel the same way. But we don't need to worry here. If I know these two idiots, they won't let Axeman get away with this. Who were you calling an idiot, Mr. Nosebleed? Zoro asked, his eye narrowing dangerously. Just like you heard me, Sanji smirked back. I'll hack you to pieces one of these days, Zoro promised darkly. Here, the subordinates were looking angry, and their eyes were filled with something other than fear, hatred. Looks like they don't like him either, Robin said softly. The only reason they followed his orders was because they were afraid of him, Zoro explained. That's usually why tyrants are in charge, Nami stated, folding her arms. Yeah, Chopper added, his eyes darkening as he thought of Wapol, and his felt anger burned inside his chest. The only reason why he was king for so long was because he was stronger than the people. Otherwise, he was sure that he would have been overthrown. If he had the power he had now when he ruled, he could have taken Wapol out. What babies, Zoro in the memory said, holding up his swords, this'll be easy. Yeah, Zoro agreed with his past self, the only thing I was really scared of was this guy's face. But Luffy didn't wait around anymore as he charged, leaving a dust trail behind him. He was going straight for Morgan. That didn't surprise them, what did was Kobe. Luffy, he shouted out, bring those Marines crumbling to their knees. First he believed that the Marines were like saints, now he's rooting for a pirate to take them out, Usopp said, watching it all with delight. He was finally having fun watching this because it was obvious from the start who was going to win. Before the Marines had any idea to what was happening, Luffy jumped up and raised his fist, ready to throw a punch. Yeah, Chopper cried out, but Axe Hand raised his heavy axe and blocked it, but the force of the punch was enough to cause the sound to reverberate throughout Morgan's body. Zoro looked to his past self in time to see him take the sword out of his mouth. He knew what was going through his mind, he was watching, wanting to see what his new captain could do. Rankless, lowlife bums, Morgan yelled as he threw off his jacket, finally snapping completely. You have no right to defy my superiority. First a Marine Captain Axe Hand Morgan. And I'm Luffy, he answered relaxed, nice to meet ya. Normally you introduce yourself before you kick someone's ass, Sanji muttered. Die, Morgan yelled bringing his axe down, leaving a deep crack in the ground from the impact. Thankfully, Luffy dodged the attack, spinning around like a top to avoid it, and then with a kick, knocked him to the ground. Come on, this isn't even a fight. Frankie cheered on, is that the best that he could do? The East Blue is easily considered the weakest of the four, Robin answered him. In fact, the average bounty in this particular sea is set at around 3 million. So I guess the Marines don't feel like they need to have extra strong Marines here. But the ones here don't have a clue to what they're doing, Nami added grimly. While she could understand that, a part of her was still resentful to them that they usually just leave the big-named pirates alone. In the end, it turned out to be a small group of pirates that took out those pirates in the whole East Blue. She smiled a little at that and felt herself stand a little taller at that. The captain's getting pummeled out there. It's embarrassing. Yeah, Frankie agreed, finding out your leader, that you're shit scared of, is actually a weakling would do that. But Luffy was far from done. He grabbed the front of Morgan's shirt and started yelling, call yourself a Marine. He then began to throw punch after punch, yelling out, you destroyed my friend Kobe's dream. He's thinking about Kobe's dream of being a Marine as well. Nami said, unsure to how to feel to that. One thing that Luffy never laughs at is somebody's dream, Zoro answered her. Yes, so long as you're willing to fight for it, he wants to help them achieve it even if it's small, Usopp said proudly. Straw Hat stop right there. Look at what I got. Someone yelled. Luffy paid no attention to them and continued to punch Morgan, but the Straw Hats looked and Chopper yelled in worry. Helmeppo was standing there with a gun to Kobe's head. Are you stupid or something? I said stop. Helmeppo screamed, if you'd pay attention to me you'd see I have a hostage here you might want to look at. Oh, he's stupid all right, Sanji answered, watching how badly Helmeppo's hand was shaking, but he might want to make it look a little more convincing. I thought that he was knocked out back in his room, Usopp said quietly. Hey, Zoro in the past said, which finally got Luffy's attention. If you value your scrawny little friend's life then don't move a muscle. Helmeppo ordered. I'm serious here. One move and I'll shoot him. Luffy stared expressionlessly at him, but then they realized that he was looking at Kobe. As if silently asking him what he wanted him to do. Kobe was frightened and was shaking, but as he looked at Luffy who gave him a winning grin, he seemed to come to a decision. Kobe blinked, and like before, his confidence suddenly seemed to erupt and he called out without a trace of fear, Luffy, listen. Don't let anything that happens to me stop you. Even if I die. Wow, Brooks said softly, was this really the same boy who was afraid to stand up for himself? Luffy has that effect on people, Robin answered, with him around, you feel that anything's possible and you feel the longing to chase your dreams. How does he do it? Nami asked wondering. Of course, you got it, Luffy said as he turned his back on Morgan and slowly approached Helmeppo as he winded up his arm. Hear that, you big idiot. Kobe is ready to die by your hand. Like Luffy would stand by and let that happen, Usopp said confidently. Helmeppo was completely panicked now, watching him coming closer. Don't you move. I said don't move or I'll shoot. I swear it. But Helmeppo and Kobe were friends when we met them, Chopper said softly, how did it go to that from this? People change, Chopper, Robin answered simply. While I don't know what happened, I think that after working together for all that time, I think that they grew to become friends. After all, when she first met Luffy and the others, she had been their enemy as well. Luffy kept slowly walking towards them before he stopped. Still grinning, he threw his arm back, ready to launch another attack, but suddenly Morgan was back on his feet and was standing behind him, ready to bring his arm down at him. Luffy, Kobe, Chopper, and Usopp warned instinctively, but Luffy didn't bother with him. Gum gum, what's he doing? Nami cried just as Zoro told her to relax. Time's up, for I am the fearless captain, Axe Hand Morgan. Axe Hand Morgan bellowed, ready for an attack that surely would have sliced Luffy right in half. Zoro picked up his swords while Helmeppo grabbed Kobe and held the gun closer to his head. Daddy, hurry up and kill him already, he cried out in panic. Pistol, Luffy screamed as the axe fell. What happened was so quick that if you blinked you would have missed it. Luffy had punched Helmeppo in the face before he could pull the trigger and was now out cold on the ground with a dented-in face. While, at the same time, Zoro charged forwards and took out Morgan in one attack. His axe-like arm was just inches from Luffy's head by the time that Zoro took care of him. Morgan stood there for a fraction of a second before his eyes rolled into the back of his head and he fell back, landing with a crash on the ground. Thank you, Luffy said to Zoro, who smiled back. Just doing my job, Captain, was his answer. And like that, the memory finally faded. Wow, Chopper whispered, pride going through his whole body, that was amazing. So that was how you two met? Brook asked in wonder. You two hardly knew each other, but you were already acting like old crewmates. I guess, Zoro confessed with a shrug. Didn't really think about it at the time, but in the heat of battle it's hard not to trust Luffy. It took me a while to really get used to it. After that, I decided that I would travel with him and see how it went. I never imagined that when we set off like that, we'd be here in the new world like this. Yeah, I think we all felt that way at first, Nami agreed, staring ahead of her at the darkness, wondering what would have happened to her if she never met with Luffy and the others, who would have thought it. And that's just how it went. Brook asked them all curiously. You all joined up one by one like that? That's right, Zoro said, it was just the two of us at first. We traveled together for a couple weeks before we teamed up with Nami. Yeah, and that was a lot of fun, Nami nodded, smiling at the memories, and we came to Usopp's village after a while. And after we helped him out there, we went to the sea restaurant where we ran into Sanji. And after you officially joined us after we dealt with Arlong, we set off for the Grand Line, Sanji added, puffing on his cigarette. Strange how it all worked out in the end now that you think of it. It usually works out the same way, Nami laughed at the thought. When Luffy asks someone to join, at first, the offer's turned down completely. However, if the person really interests Luffy, he will still try to get them to join anyway regardless of their initial decision. However, even if he is rejected, Luffy will treat the person as if they were already a crew member. Sanji spoke from experience, no matter how annoyed it makes them. He'll sometimes act as if it is his decision and not ours whether we join or not. The next memory was of Zoro and Luffy heading down the street towards the docks, Luffy carrying a sack over his shoulder, and Zoro placing his swords back to his side. That was a thin act you put on back there, Zoro said to him, I wouldn't be surprised if they see right through it. Act, Usopp repeated in confusion. Kobe should be able to handle the rest of it on his own, Luffy said confidently, I have faith in him. It is a fitting way to leave this place, Zoro said as they came to the small boat, unable to turn back seeing how everyone here hates us now. Very pirate-like, Luffy laughed as he untied the rope, yeah. It sure is. Wait, what do you mean by, everyone here hates us now? Nami asked him, not sure she understood. You mean they were upset that you took out that Morgan guy? But he was terrorizing this whole town. Frankie said loudly, why would? Oh, no, Zoro corrected, they were thrilled. They were treating us like heroes for getting those two out of their hair. I'm talking about how Luffy beat up Kobe. Oh, that makes much more sense. Whoa, wait a minute, what do you mean that Luffy beat Kobe up? Usopp yelled. You honestly think that those Marines would have let Kobe join them? Zoro asked him as they all looked just as confused, so he explained, he spent 2 years as a cabin boy on board a pirate ship. Even if he was held as a hostage, I doubt that the Marines would have let him join. Luffy wanted to help him out, show them that he wasn't on our side. So Luffy pretended to pick a fight and got Kobe so mad that he hit him and made it look like they weren't friends. Oh, I get it, yo-ho-ho-ho, Brook said happily. And because of that, the people were scared, and wanted us to leave, Zoro shrugged, unconcerned. But that all happened after we took out Axe Hand and Rika took us back to the restaurant so that we could eat. God, that food was delicious. After 3 weeks of no food, I guess so, Nami said. Anyway, the Marines came in and said that they couldn't allow pirates to stay any longer, but because they were so grateful to us for taking out Morgan, they didn't report us, Zoro finished speaking. Well, that's ungrateful of them since you saved their hides, Usopp said bitterly. They were just doing their job, Robin said, I think it was actually a reasonable deal. I take it Kobe stayed. Sanji muttered thoughtfully, lighting up another cigarette and watched as Luffy untied the little boat from the dock. Yep, Zoro said. He felt that he was ready to join the Marines, and that he didn't need Luffy's protection anymore. You think that he would have come to say goodbye though, Chopper said sadly as he watched them about to climb into the boat. Zoro didn't need to answer, knowing that wasn't true. Luffy called a familiar voice and they looked up to see that Kobe, Rika, and her mother were there. Oh, Chopper called happily, so they did come. After all that, why think that they wouldn't? Frankie asked grinning. Kobe stood there for a moment, before he sprang into a salute. I can never thank you enough. You've done more for me than anyone ever has. I've never heard of a Marine thanking the pirate who beat him up before, now there's one for the history books, memory. Zoro laughed. The one-eyed Zoro closed his eye as he smiled. It was from that moment on he knew that Luffy wasn't like any other pirate he ever met before. And not just because he was made of rubber, it was here that he knew that Straw Hat Luffy would be the only man he would call his captain. Luffy grinned as well as they spread the sail and shoved off. With Luffy waving goodbye to them all, promising, we'll meet again Kobe. Someday. Bye Luffy, they watched Kobe mouthed as Rika cried out happily, hope to see you again someday. You know, I'd like to come here and meet them all someday, Brook said softly. Me too, Nami smiled. We have a lot of friends to visit once we reach the end of the Grand Line. A long way to go. Something to look forward to, yo-ho-ho-ho, Brook proclaimed excitedly, thinking longingly of Laboon and praying that he was safe and doing well. Hey look, Frankie cried out, looking back and they turned in time to see that the Marines had come too. They sprang into salutes like Kobe did to see them off. See ya, Luffy cried out. Marines seeing pirates off isn't unusual, Robin said in a teasing tone, but usually, they do that by running them out of a town. That was definitely a surreal moment, Zoro confessed as he walked alongside the little boat. At last our pirate crew finally set sail. Luffy cried out. Not much of a crew, Sanji laughed. You two can't tell direction or cook, how'd you survive? Shut up, Zoro snapped at him. I've got the feeling some interesting adventures are waiting for us, Zoro said coolly from the back of the boat. You had no idea how right you were either, Nami told him tiredly, thinking about all the messes they had gotten themselves into since joining up. You can't say it's been dull though, Robin asked her. Luffy laughed happily at those words, and I'll be king of the pirates. I know it. Zoro gazed at him as if he were a difficult riddle and asked, you seem more than a little obsessed about becoming king of the pirates. Is there any kind of story behind it or any kind of reason at all? Yeah, there was, present Zoro said. I know now. No reason, Luffy told him, it's just. Just what? He asked. I promised someone, a while back, Luffy confessed, his hand on his hat as his eyes became glassy for a moment and they knew that he was thinking of Shanks. I swore that I would gather a crew, find the world's greatest treasure, and become king of the pirates. He grinned as he finished, and this straw hat knows the whole story. Past Zoro smirked as he gazed up at the sky, I see. Now let's go. Luffy cried out eagerly as they headed towards the setting sun, time to set our heading to the Grand Line. Getting a little ahead of himself isn't he? Nami asked, though unable to find any scorn to use in her voice as she smiled at Zoro. But didn't you ask him what he meant? Usopp asked Zoro, who shrugged. No, he answered. It really wasn't my business to know. If he wanted to tell me, he would've. He said more about it than I thought he would. He just didn't mention Shanks' name. And also, he knew what it meant to fulfill your dream because of a promise. His hand went to Kuina's sword as he thought that. Yeah, he could get it. Funny that you two only met because he just heard a rumor about you, Usopp stated, looking at Zoro. If he hadn't, you'd be dead. I guess I should count my blessings, Zoro said unconcerned. But still, seeing these memories were bringing up so many of his own. More than anything else at the moment, he wished that he could speak with Luffy about this. But as if they were hearing his thoughts, a scene came up again, but it wasn't what they expected. They had thought that they would be at sea with Luffy and Zoro again, but instead they were in a very familiar-looking forest. Wait, Robin said, staring around her. Is this? It's the Middle Forest, Chopper said, having seen these trees enough times to know what it was. But something was different here. Here, he could really smell the trees and plants here. Seriously? Sanji asked, looking up at the trees. You know, I think you're right. Why the hell are we back here? Nami looked back to Zoro and asked, did you and Luffy come back here? He shook his head. No, he answered honestly. We spent most of our time at sea till we met up with you, we never stopped by Goa, and if we did, I think Luffy would have mentioned it. Man, I'm really getting tired of this, Usopp said, now wishing that he was out of this place as he went to kick a tree to vent some of his frustration, expecting for his foot to just go through, but this time. Oh, he screamed, jumping up and down, holding his foot as he hopped up and down in pain. That hurt. What? That's impossible, Nami said, coming towards him as he rubbed his big toe. We're in a memory, aren't we? We aren't supposed to feel anything. We haven't been able to do anything since this whole trip down memory lane started. I hate to say it, Nami Swan, Sanji said, touching the tree nearest him. But we can feel it here. What? Robin repeated in surprise, going to some flowers near her feet and picking one. You're right, she muttered in surprise, holding the delicate flower in her hands. We can touch things here. What's going on? Chopper whispered, but just then they heard a loud shout not too far away. Without another word, desperate for some answers, they took off, having getting bumped and scratched along the way, no longer able to just go through things like they had been. Feeling as if they were going to lose their minds, they came near a clearing, they stopped dead at what they saw. There was Ace standing there, but this wasn't like the memory versions of him that they've seen. For those who met him, he looked just like how he did when they met him in Alabasta, a grown-up, mature version of him instead of the wild child or teenager they had seen him as. He was there with Luffy, and this time they knew that it had to be their Luffy. He was looking just like how they saw him this morning when they arrived at this island, but what really got their attention was that he was hugging a young man who they realized was like a grown-up version of Sabo. Luffy had his face buried in his shoulder as Sabo patting his back in a comforting way as he cried. Luffy. Chopper whispered, moving forward, staring at Sabo's smiling face. Luffy was crying so loudly that he didn't hear them, but someone else did. Ace slowly turned to look at them, seemingly unsurprised to see them there. He tilted his hat back up, grinning at them all in a teasing way before he put a finger to his lips, silently telling them to stay quiet. As if that had been the signal, they suddenly felt the wind pick up, blowing them backwards. Startled, they tried to move forward, but the wind picked up, getting stronger and stronger, as if they were in the middle of a tornado. Without any warning, the entire crew was suddenly swept off their feet and thrown violently up into the sky, unable to so much as scream as the darkness clouded their visions, blacking them out. The whole time Ace just smiled as he watched the crew disappear. Luffy finally looked up excitedly at Sabo. This is great. We're all together again. Ace, what are you looking at? Just waving to someone, he said coolly, smiling as Luffy looked to see where he was looking but saw nothing. But I don't, he said. It's nothing, Sabo laughed, ruffling Luffy's hair. It's good to see you again. Luffy blinked and grinned back before jumping in for another hug, not aware that his crew had been there just moments ago. Zoro. Zoro was left drifting through a void-like space. Unlike the dark one before, this one was filled with a brilliant light shining around him. Here, he was floating, as if his body was being supported by water. He felt sick, but at the same time, felt a strange sense of peace and felt himself starting to doze off, fighting the urge to sleep. What just happened? One minute he was in a memory, the next he wasn't, and now this place. His mind felt fuzzy, like he had one too many, as he struggled to remember, to figure out what was going on. You really let him get into some trouble this time, suddenly came a familiar voice from next to him. Though he only heard that voice once before, he knew who it was. Ace, he asked in surprise, wondering if he was going crazy. Glad to see that your memory isn't as weak as you seem to be, said another voice, this one he knew anywhere, though it had been years since he last heard it. His eyes snapped open and he was staring up at him. Looking to his side, he saw them. Fire Fist Ace was standing there beside him, but his eyes were focused only on the small figure next to him. A young girl with short, dark blue hair, and dark brown eyes was there, a smug smile that he knew all too well. It was the same smirk she gave him every time she beat him. Kuina, he croaked out, his one eye widening as he saw her face. Again she smirked as she looked him up and down. Nice look, Cyclops, she said, but really, you haven't changed a bit. What's going on? He demanded. You two can't be here. Am I dead? Jumping the gun aren't you? Kuina asked teasingly. No, don't worry. You're far from dead. Then where? He began, now feeling the familiar sense of frustration he always felt when he spoke with her arrive and push out the shock and disbelief. You're in an in-between world, Ace explained, his arms folded and his eyes hidden by the rim of his hat, a space between the lands of the living and the dead. And how did I get here? He asked slowly. You've been here all along, dummy, Kuina stated as if it was obvious from the start. But this place isn't anything like before, Zoro retorted angrily. Nothing is as it seems here, Ace told him, so you can't take anything for granted. Zoro blinked several times as he continued to stare at Kuina. She looked just like how she did when he last saw her, the night that they made their vow. It had been the last time he saw her alive. I don't know whether or not to be angry with you for letting him come here, or thankful, Ace said suddenly, shaking his head. I asked for you to look after him for me, but instead, you let him get dragged off here. When you say, him, I'm guessing you're talking about Luffy. Zoro asked. Who else? He asked with a shrug. You mind telling me what's going on? Zoro demanded, growing angry. The island that you all landed on is usually avoided by everyone in the New World, Ace explained. This is the island named Agartha. Agartha, he repeated slowly, trying to recall where he heard that before. Wait, Robin mentioned that place didn't she? Something about the land of the dead. Not as slow as you used to be, Zoro. Kuina smiled. More like a door to the in-between, Ace corrected. The living cannot go beyond the in-between without losing their lives. This place you see is like a bridge. You can only go as far as halfway. You go any farther, and you pass on to the next world. How am I here? He asked. Isn't it obvious? You went through the door, Kuina stated, as if speaking to a child. The door? You mean that hole? Zoro asked. What do you think? She asked, rolling her eyes, that was so nostalgic that he had to fight the urge to smile. This place was once sacred, here it was possible for you to meet with lost loved ones and speak with them once again, Ace explained, his hands now in his pockets. But the more people that traveled here, their intense desires soon grew. What do you mean? Zoro asked, not understanding, and what's with the memories that we're seeing? My little brother's memories, he repeated dully. It's obvious. In order to gain the right to see your loved one, you have to share your memories of what it means to be alive. You must show those memories for the right to speak with a dead person again. When you jumped down to find Luffy, you viewed a handful of those memories. And why am I here now? Where are the others? He asked, suddenly starting to grow anxious the longer he was here. They're all safe at the moment, Ace assured them. At the moment, Zoro repeated, now getting angry. As I was saying before, the intense desires to speak with someone soon grew so powerful that I guess that they developed feelings of their own, Ace went on. That's why the door was closed and the key broken. The collected emotions, along with the power that this place holds, soon gave birth to a monster. And when the door was opened, Luffy was brought down here, but he also released the creature. Zoro sighed. Great job, Luffy, he groaned out. I'm sorry, Ace told him with a sigh. He's always been a handful, though I'm sure I don't need to tell you that, you must know that by now. What happened to the monster? Zoro demanded. I haven't seen anything. Because this monster doesn't have a form yet, you can't see it, Ace explained, it has no mind of its own. It knows only what the memories it sees shows. As we speak, it's now on the island and is shaping it to its will. In other words, it's using the power of the in-between and your captain's memories to try and take shape, Kuina finished for him. What does it want? He asked. Hard to say, Ace confessed. All I know is that it has taken form from someone in Luffy's memories. Now this whole island is a part of it. What do you mean? Zoro asked, feeling himself slipping back to sleep, though he desperately wanted to stay awake. I mean that the entire island has changed into fragments of memories and the creature has hid itself here, he answered, as Zoro was now losing the fight to stay awake. So if you want to close the door, you gotta find the creature and lure it back here, Kuina said, her voice disappearing, and he fought even harder to stay awake, not wanting to say goodbye just yet. Don't worry, Ace's voice went on, Luffy's safe with me for the moment. But until the monster's destroyed, I can't send him back. So please do what you can to destroy it. Wait, Zoro said, his eye finally growing too heavy for him and felt himself drifting off. It'll be alright, Kuina said, and her voice was the last thing he heard before darkness took over and he slipped away. If you can destroy the creature, we'll explain everything to you. Now prove to me that you're stronger than when you used to lose to me.